If you really question your life, one thing becomes clear. Most of it is suffering, hoping for just some moments of happiness. And yet, despite the endless torment, you continue living, driven by something that is beyond logic, the insatiable will to live. For Arthur Schopenhauer, this will was the fundamental force behind all existence. In The World as Will and Representation, he described it as a blind, relentless drive that compels every living being to survive, reproduce, and persist. It isn't rational, conscious, or purposeful. It simply is. Schopenhauer wrote, "Life is assured to the will to live. Therefore, it clings to it, even in the most miserable conditions." But the will is not a source of joy. It is the root of suffering. Fulfill one desire, and another takes its place. Escape one pain, and a new one emerges. Schopenhauer argued that pleasure is fleeting, while suffering is constant. He wrote, "All satisfaction is only negative, the removal of a desire and pain." This struggle is universal. In nature, life devours life in a cycle of survival. In human existence, ambition often leads to emptiness. Unlike animals, we reflect on our suffering, yet remain trapped by the will, amplifying our own misery. Hell is other people. Hell isn't where you go, it's who you're with. Jean-Paul Sartre's idea, hell is other people, reveals a profound truth about human relationships. For Sartre, the essence of torment lies in being trapped under the gaze of others. Human existence is shaped by how we are seen and judged, forcing us to view ourselves through their perceptions rather than as we truly are. Picture yourself standing in front of a funhouse mirror that distorts your reflection. No matter how you adjust or try to explain what you really look like, the reflection defines you in the eyes of everyone watching. Sartre argued that this is what it feels like to exist in the presence of others. Every glance, every judgment imposes a version of you that may not align with your true self. This dynamic isn't just an occasional discomfort, it's a fundamental part of human existence. The need for validation locks us in a cycle where we crave recognition, even though it limits our authenticity. Sartre believed that the gaze of others turns us into objects, stripping away the freedom to define ourselves independently. Human relationships, even at their best, carry this inherent tension. The mere presence of others creates an invisible web of expectations and judgments, trapping us in roles we never fully choose. For Sartre, this unresolvable conflict defines the human condition, a constant pull between the desire to be seen and the inevitable loss of freedom that comes with it. Sardian nihilism. Morality is just an illusion. Nature doesn't care if you are good or evil, just or cruel. This is the stark foundation of Sardian nihilism, a philosophy rooted in the provocative works of the Marquis de Sade, whose ideas challenge the very essence of morality itself. At its core, Sardian nihilism denies the existence of universal moral truths. De Sade argued that concepts like virtue and justice are human inventions imposed on an indifferent and amoral natural world. In his novel Justine, he declares, "Nature has created us all solely to torment one another." For de Sade, nature is driven purely by survival and desire, indifferent to human constructs of right and wrong. De Sade's view of humanity reflects this brutal indifference. He saw people as creatures governed by raw impulses rather than reason or ethics. If morality is nothing more than a human fabrication, he concluded, there is no obligation to adhere to its rules. In The Philosophy in the Bedroom, he claimed that true freedom lies in embracing natural desires, no matter how transgressive or destructive. Teleological suffering. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. This observation from Richard Dawkins captures the essence of teleological suffering, the belief that pain exists without meaning, purpose, or redemption. Nature is indifferent to suffering. Predators hunt, prey suffers, and parasites thrive, all as a consequence of survival, not morality or design. Suffering in this view isn't a test or lesson, it's simply a byproduct of life's relentless processes. There's no cosmic plan, no higher goal to explain the pain that pervades existence. The term dysteleology combines the Greek telos, meaning end or purpose, with dys, implying something flawed or misaligned. It rejects comforting narratives that suffering serves a greater good, revealing a world driven by chaos and competition, rather than divine order. Objection. Why does a rotting corpse horrify us so deeply? Why do we recoil from things that blur the boundaries between human and inhuman? These reactions stem from objection, a concept explored by Julia Kristeva in her book Powers of Horror. Objection isn't just fear or disgust, it's the psychological unease we feel when something disrupts the boundaries that define our sense of self. Kristeva explains that human identity relies on clear distinctions: self and other, life and death, clean and unclean. The abject is anything that breaks these boundaries, forcing us to confront what we've repressed or excluded. Bodily fluids like blood or vomit unsettle us because they blur the line between inside and outside, reminding us of our physicality, vulnerability, and mortality. A corpse, once alive and now decaying, occupies a space between human and other. It confronts us with the reality of death, a reality we often work hard to ignore. God is dead. Friedrich Nietzsche's words, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him," are among the most provocative in philosophy. Written in his 1882 work, The Gay Science, this wasn't a declaration, but a dire warning. Nietzsche wasn't speaking of a literal deity's death, but the collapse of the belief systems that had guided Western civilization for centuries. At the core of this idea is the impact of the Enlightenment, science, and secularization. Faith in God was replaced by faith in reason and progress, liberating humanity from religious dogma. But Nietzsche saw this as a double-edged sword. The moral framework provided by religion was gone, leaving humanity untethered, drifting in a world without absolute meaning or values. He illustrated this existential crisis through his parable of the madman. In it, a man runs into a marketplace declaring that God is dead and we are his murderers. The crowd laughs, not grasping the weight of his words. The madman laments, "What did we do when we unchained this earth from its sun? Are we not plunging continually? Is there still any up or down? Without God, humanity loses its foundation, risking a descent into nihilism, the belief that life is meaningless." Being and nothingness. Existence precedes essence. Jean-Paul Sartre's foundational statement in Being and Nothingness captures the core of his existentialist philosophy. Humans are not born with a predetermined nature or purpose. Instead, we create our essence through actions and choices. Sartre argues that we are defined not by what we are, but by what we do. Sartre distinguishes between two modes of being in itself and being for itself. Being in itself refers to inanimate objects that simply exist, fixed, unchanging, and unaware. A chair or a rock, for example, has no capacity for self-reflection or transformation. Being for itself, by contrast, describes human consciousness. Unlike objects, humans exist as incomplete and constantly changing, defined by their ability to reflect, choose, and imagine possibilities. Central to Sartre's philosophy is the concept of nothingness. Consciousness introduces a gap, nothingness, between ourselves and the world. This gap allows humans to envision what could be and act freely. However, this freedom comes with an immense burden: the responsibility to shape our lives and humanity through our choices. Eternal torment of samsara. Life is suffering, not just in its hardest moments, but in its very nature. This is the heart of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth in Buddhism. It's not just a single lifetime or a metaphor for struggle. but the infinite repetition of existence itself, driven by karma, the law of cause and effect. Every action plants a seed, shaping future lives, but even good karma binds you to samsara as long as desire, attachment, and ignorance persist. What makes samsara truly tormenting is not just the suffering, but the illusion that traps us. We chase fleeting happiness, believing it will bring fulfillment, only to be met with disappointment. Even life's joys, love, success, comfort, are impermanent, slipping away like sand through fingers. Nagarjuna likened samsara to a sea of suffering, endlessly tossing waves of birth and death. In this sea, all beings, from insects to kings, are bound by the same karmic chains. Buddhism teaches that ignorance is the root of this suffering. We mistake the impermanent for eternal, the painful for pleasurable, and the self for something real. These delusions blind us to the possibility of liberation. Escape lies in nirvana, not a place, but a state beyond suffering, desire, and individuality. It's the ultimate freedom, but reaching it demands abandoning attachments and seeing the world as it truly is, impermanent, interconnected, and empty of inherent essence. The shadow. There's a part of you refuse to see, a hidden side you deny or project onto others. Carl Jung called this the shadow. It's always there, influencing who you are, whether you acknowledge it or not. Jung believed the shadow contains everything we reject about ourselves, our dark impulses, forbidden desires, and unacknowledged flaws. But it's not just evil. It's any part of you that doesn't align with the image you want to project. The shadow is born when we suppress these traits, often in childhood, to meet societal or familial expectations. Paradoxically, the more we suppress the shadow, the more control it gains. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Your shadow manifests in subtle ways. Anger you project, envy disguised as criticism, or insecurities driving your choices. Jung called the process of confronting the shadow integration. It's not about indulging impulses, but understanding them. By facing the shadow, you achieve individuation, becoming a whole, authentic self. Suppressed traits like ambition or creativity can transform into strengths when acknowledged. Misanthropy. Humanity is often praised as a marvel of evolution, capable of art, science, and love. But to the misanthrope, humanity is a plague, a species defined by greed, cruelty, and self-destruction. Is this a harsh truth or simply the disillusionment of those who see too clearly? Misanthropy, the distrust or hatred of humankind, has echoed through history. Ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes roamed Athens with a lantern, claiming to search for an honest man, though he doubted one existed. Arthur Schopenhauer took this further, describing humanity as driven by a blind, selfish will, a force that perpetuates endless suffering. Misanthropy isn't just philosophical pessimism, it's a critique of the human condition. Misanthropes argue that our capacity for destruction outweighs our virtues. War, environmental collapse, and systemic injustice reveal a species whose intelligence often amplifies its flaws. Human sacrifice. Mythos. Few ideas are as unsettling as human sacrifice. The act of offering a life to appease gods, seek favor, or restore balance. What drove civilizations across the globe to embrace such rituals, and what does this reveal about the human psyche? Human sacrifice spanned cultures and eras, from Aztec temples to Celtic druids, from ancient China to Mesopotamia. At its heart was the belief that blood was the ultimate currency in the cosmic economy. For the Aztecs, it wasn't just ritual, it was necessity. The gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and humanity owed a debt. Historian David Carrasco noted, "Without the nourishment of blood, the sun would fail to rise. Sacrifice ensured the universe's survival. But why humans, not animals or crops? Life itself held sacred, unmatched value. Offering a human life was the ultimate gift, imbued with profound spiritual weight. Philosopher René Girard explored the psychology of sacrifice, proposing it emerged to resolve social conflict. His scapegoat mechanism theory suggested societies channeled collective guilt or fear onto a single victim, restoring unity. Sacrifice wasn't just spiritual, it reinforced political power. Priests and rulers claimed authority through their ability to mediate between humanity and the divine. Over time, Nietzsche argued, sacrifice evolved. Ritual bloodshed gave way to moral sacrifices, self-denial and guilt, shaped by religious systems like Christianity. Today, human sacrifice is gone, but its echoes persist in our stories and the idea of sacrificing for greater causes. The death drive. Why do we sabotage ourselves? Why do we sometimes choose chaos over order, destruction over survival? Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, believed he had an answer: the death drive. Beneath our conscious minds lies a dark and primal force, a pull not toward life, but toward self-destruction and the return to nothingness. In his 1920 work Beyond the Pleasure Principle, Freud introduced the death drive, or thanatos. Until then, Freud had focused on the pleasure principle, the idea that humans seek pleasure and avoid pain. But he noticed something perplexing. Not all behavior aligns with this instinct. People engage in self-sabotage, repeat harmful patterns, and gravitate towards suffering. Why? Freud argued that alongside our drive to live, there is an opposing force pulling us toward destruction. At its heart, the death drive reflects a desire to return to a state of non-existence, a primordial stillness before life began. Freud described it as an urge inherent in organic life to restore an earlier state of things. It manifests in decay, risky behaviors, and the self-destructive tendencies that plague individuals and societies alike. Nihilism. Life has no inherent meaning, no ultimate purpose written into the fabric of existence. This is the claim of nihilism, a philosophy that strips away assumptions and forces us to confront reality without comforting illusions. It doesn't dismiss life, it challenges us to face it as it truly is, unfiltered and raw. At its core, nihilism contends that the systems we trust, morality, religion, identity, are mere human constructs. The values and beliefs that once provided life with meaning are baseless, leaving a void where certainty once stood. When these frameworks collapse, we are left questioning the validity of our values and goals. If there is no ultimate truth or purpose, what justifies any of our actions? Some see nihilism as a chance for profound liberation. With no preordained purpose, individuals are free to construct their own values and meanings. This perspective transforms nihilism from a doctrine of despair into a foundation for personal empowerment and self-creation. However, others perceive nihilism as a descent into chaos and despair. Without a higher authority or objective meaning, it risks reducing life to a series of meaningless acts, where morality becomes arbitrary and existence feels hollow. Radical skepticism. Are you certain the world around you is real? What if everything, your thoughts, memories, and even your sense of self, is an illusion? This unsettling idea lies at the core of radical skepticism, a philosophy that asks, how do you know anything at all? Radical skepticism challenges the foundations of certainty itself. René Descartes, the 17th century philosopher, confronted this head-on. He doubted everything, his senses, the world, even his own body. I shall suppose, he wrote, that some malicious demon has employed all his energies to deceive me. Even the simplest truths, like the existence of the external world, could be questioned. In this search for absolute certainty, Descartes found one unshakable realization: cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. The very act of doubting proved his existence as a thinking being. Yet this was a lonely certainty. Everything beyond his thoughts remained suspect. David Hume took this skepticism further. He argued that our minds are merely a bundle of fleeting perceptions, stitched together by habit, not logic. He even questioned causality itself. How do we know one event causes another? For Hume, our assumptions about the world, like the sun rising tomorrow, are based on probabilities, not guarantees. Radical skepticism isn't confined to philosophy books. Every time you misremember something or mistake a dream for reality, you step into its unsettling world. It offers no comforting answers, only the truth that certainty is elusive. The more we probe reality, the more it dissolves. So, the next time you feel sure about something, pause, question. You may find less certainty than you imagined. The silence of God. If God exists, why is he silent? This question lies at the heart of the silence of God, a problem that has haunted humanity for centuries. It doesn't ask whether God exists, but why. If he does, he seems so absent, especially in moments of suffering and doubt. The Danish philosopher 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓎 wrestled with this silence, seeing it not as absence, but as a test of faith. He described faith as the contradiction between the infinite passion of inwardness and the objective uncertainty. To Kierkegaard, the silence demanded a leap into the unknown, a trust in God without tangible proof. For thinkers like Simone Weil, the silence of God becomes paradoxical in suffering. Weil believed that silence wasn't abandonment, but an invitation to find meaning within struggle. She wrote, "The greatness of Christianity lies in the fact that it does not seek a supernatural remedy for suffering, but a supernatural use for it." The problem deepens with a darker possibility. What if the silence isn't a test or a mystery, but just silence? What if there's no divine voice, no presence, no answer at all? Antinatalism. Every birth is a gamble, and the stakes are existence itself. Antinatalism, one of philosophy's most unsettling ideas, argues that this gamble isn't worth taking. It claims that bringing a child into the world is an act of harm, no matter how well-intentioned. At the heart of modern antinatalism is David Benatar, whose book Better Never to Have Been makes a stark case. Benatar's argument hinges on the asymmetry of pleasure and pain. He suggests that while the presence of pain is bad and the presence of pleasure is good, the absence of pain is always good, even if no one exists to experience it. Meanwhile, the absence of pleasure is not bad because there is no one to miss it. In his words, bringing someone into existence inflicts harm. Failing to bring someone into existence does not. This argument challenges our understanding of life itself. Where many see life as a gift, Benatar sees it as a burden filled with unavoidable suffering. Hunger, illness, loss, and the inevitability of death are part of the human condition. While life has joys, Benatar argues that they are fleeting and often overshadowed by pain. Ontological insecurity. What happens when your sense of reality feels unsteady, when the boundaries between self and world blur, and your very existence feels uncertain? This is ontological insecurity, a concept introduced by psychiatrist R.D. in The Divided Self. It's not just a psychological state, it's a profound challenge to how we understand identity and existence. Lange describes ontological insecurity as the feeling that one's being is fragile or at risk of collapse. For most people, life unfolds on a stable stage. We trust our sense of self, our relationships, and the world. But for someone experiencing ontological insecurity, that stage is shaky. They might feel detached, questioning their perceptions or even their own coherence as a self. Lange identified 3 fears that define this state. First is engulfment, the fear of losing oneself in relationships or being consumed by others' demands. This leads to avoiding intimacy to protect a fragile sense of self. Second is implosion, a dread of being overwhelmed by inner chaos or the vastness of existence itself. The third is petrification, the feeling of being seen as an object, stripped of humanity and agency. Ontological insecurity often appears in conditions like schizophrenia or severe anxiety, where self-world boundaries dissolve. Laying saw it not as pathology, but as a response to a chaotic or isolating world. This idea echoes existentialist philosophy. For Sartre, the disorienting awareness of existence, or nausea, mirrors the destabilizing nature of ontological insecurity. Heidegger's concept of thrownness, being cast into a world beyond our control, captures our shared vulnerability. Laying believed understanding ontological insecurity begins with empathy. It forces us to confront the fragility of identity and ask, what holds us together when reality itself feels unstable? Moral nihilism. Good, evil, right, wrong. What if these weren't universal truths, but human inventions, stories we've created to impose order on a chaotic universe? This is the claim of moral nihilism, the belief that morality isn't real, but a construct, a fiction we tell ourselves. 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓇𝓎, one of moral nihilism's key proponents, opens his book, Ethics, Inventing Right and Wrong, with the bold assertion, there are no objective values. For Mackey, moral claims, justice, kindness, cruelty, aren't facts about the world. Instead, they're projections of human emotions and social conventions, as unreal as shadows cast on a wall. Mackey supports this view with two arguments. The first is the argument from relativity. Across cultures and history, moral codes differ wildly. One society's virtue is another's vice. If morality were truly objective, shouldn't we expect more consistency? Mackey suggests that these differences arise not from universal truths, but from human needs shaped by specific contexts. The second is the argument from queerness. If objective moral values existed, they'd be unlike anything else in the universe. Strange, metaphysical entities guiding human behavior. How could we even detect such things? For Mackey, this idea is implausible, further undermining the notion of objective morality. But moral nihilism doesn't demand chaos or lawlessness. Mackey describes morality as a useful fiction. Rules like stealing is wrong aren't cosmic truths, they're tools that promote social stability. The fiction works, even if it's not real. Cosmic horror. The universe is vast, indifferent, and incomprehensible. For every star we see, countless others remain hidden, their light lost to the void. It's here, in this infinite silence, that cosmic horror finds its home, an existential dread rooted in our insignificance within a cosmos that neither knows nor cares about us. H.P. Lovecraft articulated this terror best, writing, "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. This isn't fear of monsters, but of realizing that the world we know floats in an abyss governed by forces beyond comprehension. Cosmic horror thrives on the premise that human intellect is inadequate to grasp the true nature of existence. If the universe is indifferent, what happens to morality or meaning? Cosmic horror revels in this uncertainty, forcing us to confront truths that might shatter our understanding. It's like an ant on a smartphone, aware only of the surface, blind to the intricate systems beneath. Negative utilitarianism. Pain is universal. No matter who you are, suffering cuts deeper than joy ever soars. Negative utilitarianism forces us to confront a harrowing question. If ethics aims to reduce suffering, shouldn't eliminating pain take precedence over creating happiness? Philosopher Karl Popper articulated this idea in The Open Society and Its Enemies, writing, "Suffering makes a direct moral appeal for help, while there is no similar call to increase the happiness of a man who is doing well anyway." For Popper, alleviating suffering is not just important, it's morally urgent. Negative utilitarianism builds on utilitarianism, which seeks to maximize well-being. But unlike traditional utilitarianism, it prioritizes preventing harm over promoting happiness. The reasoning is clear. Suffering is more impactful than pleasure. While joy might brighten a moment, pain, especially intense or chronic, can dominate a life. Few would trade constant agony for fleeting happiness. This philosophy, however, sparks controversy. Critics highlight its unsettling implications. If eliminating suffering is paramount, wouldn't the most efficient solution be the eradication of all sentient life? After all, where there is no life, there is no pain. Philosopher David Pearce, a proponent of negative utilitarian ideas, suggests a less extreme approach, leveraging science and technology to eradicate suffering, envisioning a future where pain itself is obsolete. Despite its stark conclusions, negative utilitarianism poses an urgent moral challenge. In a world rife with preventable suffering, hunger, disease, war, shouldn't reducing pain outweigh the pursuit of happiness? It forces us to ask, what if true morality lies not in how much joy we create, but in how much suffering we prevent? And isn't that the part of life most in need of our attention? Determinism. Every decision you've ever made, what you ate for breakfast, who you've become, might not have been a choice at all. Determinism argues that every action, thought, and event is the inevitable result of prior causes, making freedom an illusion. The idea dates back to ancient philosophy, but 18th century mathematician Pierre-Simon Laplace captured its essence with his concept of Laplace's demon. This hypothetical intelligence, knowing the position and motion of every particle in the universe, could predict the future with absolute certainty. For such an intellect, Laplace wrote, nothing would be uncertain, and the future, like the past, would be present before its eyes. Determinism rests on cause and effect. From atomic movements to neural firings, every action is bound by prior events. If time were rewound, every thought and action would unfold exactly the same way, as they were never truly under your control. The myth of Sisyphus. What's the point of it all? Day after day, you strive and struggle, only to face the same challenges tomorrow. For Albert Camus, this endless repetition mirrors the story of Sisyphus, a man condemned to roll a boulder up a hill, only for it to roll back down every time. It's a tale of futility, but Camus saw it as the perfect metaphor for the human condition. In his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus asks the ultimate question: is life worth living? If life has no inherent meaning, isn't existence itself absurd? The absurd, Camus explains, arises from the clash between our search for purpose and the universe's indifference. Yet, rather than despair, Camus finds liberation. The struggle itself toward the heights, he writes, is enough to fill a man's heart. Sisyphus, endlessly toiling without hope of success, seems trapped. But Camus reclaims his story. By embracing the absurd, acknowledging the meaninglessness of his task, Sisyphus transcends his punishment. The gods control his fate, but not his defiance. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, Camus concludes, because in his rebellion, he finds freedom. Camus' philosophy isn't about despair, it's about living fully despite life's absurdity. He rejects both nihilism and false hope, insisting that life's lack of inherent meaning amplifies its value. Each moment becomes an opportunity to create meaning, not because the universe demands it, but because we choose it. Like Sisyphus, we face our own endless cycles. But for Camus, it's not the task that defines us, but our attitude toward it. In the climb, we find our freedom. Animal suffering in theodicy. If God is all good and all powerful, why does innocent suffering exist, especially among animals incapable of moral failings? This question, central to animal suffering in theodicy, challenges religious and philosophical thought. Animals have suffered for millions of years: predation, disease, starvation, natural disasters. Unlike humans, they can't rationalize or find meaning in their pain. If this suffering lacks purpose, why would a benevolent God allow it? Philosopher William Rowe famously illustrated this with his fawn in the forest thought experiment. A fawn caught in a wildfire, suffering immensely before dying alone. Rowe asks, what purpose does this serve? If none exists, such suffering challenges the existence of an all-good God. Theists have offered various theodicies to reconcile suffering with divine benevolence. The greater good defense suggests that animal suffering supports a larger divine plan. Pain and predation balance ecosystems, fostering complexity. Others argue the free will defense, claiming natural world unpredictability is necessary for human freedom. But animals, lacking moral agency, complicate this explanation. John Hick proposed suffering as essential for soul-making, shaping moral and spiritual growth. But what spiritual growth exists for a gazelle devoured by a lion or a bird infected by parasites? Critics like David Atfield argue such defenses fail. Animal suffering seems excessive, gratuitous, and beyond necessity. Terror management theory. Every decision you make, every belief you hold, might be shaped by one thing: the fear of death. Terror management theory reveals how the awareness of our mortality influences thoughts, actions, and even society itself. Developed by psychologists Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pischinsky in the 1980s, the theory builds on Ernest Becker's The Denial of Death. Becker argued that humans, uniquely aware of their mortality, face an existential terror that could paralyze us. To cope, we create systems of meaning, religion, art, nationalism that give life purpose and connect us to something greater. These cultural worldviews shield us from the unsettling reality of our impermanence. But this defense comes with a cost. When our worldviews are challenged, our fear of death resurfaces. Research shows that subtle reminders of mortality, what psychologists call mortality salience, can profoundly shape behavior. People become more defensive of their cultural values, resistant to opposing ideas, and even hostile toward those who threaten their beliefs. In one study, participants reminded of death were more likely to support charismatic leaders, promising strength and stability. This fear doesn't just shape individuals, it defines societies. Our monuments, traditions, and rituals aren't just cultural artifacts. They're defenses against death's shadow, anchoring us to a sense of permanence. Bundle theory of the self. Who are you? Is there a core you beneath your thoughts and experiences? Philosopher David Hume thought not. In his treatise of human nature, Hume introduced the bundle theory of the self, a revolutionary idea that challenges our sense of identity. Hume argued that when we look inward, we don't find a singular, unchanging self. Instead, we encounter a constantly shifting stream of perceptions, sensations, thoughts, and emotions. He wrote, "When I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception. I never can catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception." According to Hume, the self is not a unified entity, but a bundle, a collection of experiences loosely connected, like beads on a string. Except there is no string. The self is merely the sum of its parts, an illusion created by the mind's need for continuity. Imagine a movie reel. The frames blur together to create the illusion of motion, but pause it, and you see individual disconnected images. Hume suggested our sense of self operates the same way, a mental construct, not a constant truth. This challenges concepts like identity, responsibility, and morality. If there's no core self, who is accountable for our actions? Critics like Immanuel Kant argued that organizing perceptions requires a stable self. Others point to memory and narrative as creating continuity. Yet modern neuroscience supports Hume. Studies reveal the brain as a patchwork of systems working in parallel, with no central coordinator. The self, it seems, is a process, not a thing. Hume's theory leaves us with a liberating thought. If we're a bundle of experiences, we're free to grow and redefine ourselves with every passing moment. The problem of other minds. How do you know anyone else is conscious? Not just alive, but truly aware, thinking, feeling, and experiencing the world like you do. Your best friend, your family, even strangers on the street. What if they're merely mimicking human behavior without any inner awareness? This is the problem of other minds, a haunting question in philosophy with no definitive answer. The problem stems from the subjective nature of consciousness. You know you're conscious because you experience your own thoughts and emotions. But when it comes to others, you only observe their behavior. A smile might suggest happiness, or tears might indicate sadness. But are these signs of inner experience or just outward displays? How can you rule out the possibility that others are philosophical zombies, entities that act conscious but lack true awareness? René Descartes famously declared, "I think, therefore I am," proving his own consciousness. But he couldn't extend that certainty to others, leaving their minds an open question. Modern neuroscience maps brain activity and correlates it with thoughts and feelings. But even this doesn't access the subjective experience of another person. We can measure the brain's mechanisms, but not its inner reality. Here's the unsettling twist. Just as you can't prove others are conscious, no one can prove you are. From their perspective, you might be the automaton, going through the motions without awareness. This question challenges everything: our morality, relationships, and empathy. Yet we act as if others are conscious because the alternative is unbearable. A world where your mind is the only reality. 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓇𝓎. What if something could create itself, exist without any external cause? This is 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓇𝓎, the idea of being one's own cause. It challenges logic, forcing us to rethink the very nature of existence. The concept originates with Baruch Spinoza, who used it to describe God, or, as he called it, substance. In Ethics, Spinoza wrote, "That thing is called free, which exists from the necessity of its own nature alone, and is determined to act by itself alone." For Spinoza, God, or the universe, is 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓇𝓎, self-caused, infinite, and dependent on nothing else. This idea defies how we understand causality. Everything relies on something else: a tree from a seed from another tree. But where does the chain begin? Spinoza's answer is radical, with something that simply exists, needing no cause because it is the cause. 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓇𝓎 also resonates in existential philosophy. Thinkers like Sartre explored the human desire to be self-created. Sartre called it the project of being God, the longing to define ourselves without external influence. While humans can't truly be 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓇𝓎, the struggle to define ourselves shapes our existence. In science, echoes of 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓎 emerge in questions about the universe's origin. If everything has a cause, what caused the universe? Could it create itself, or does it require an external first cause? For Spinoza, the universe doesn't need a reason to exist. It simply does. This idea isn't about escaping causality, but understanding it. 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓎 forces us to confront a paradox. Can anything truly cause itself? Or is it a reflection of our longing to escape the web of causes that define us? Beginning toward death, you're dying, not someday far in the future, but right now. Each passing moment, each breath brings you closer to the end. This stark truth forms the foundation of Martin Heidegger's concept of being toward death. For Heidegger, death isn't just an event. It's the defining feature of existence, shaping how we live each day. Death is paradoxical, both absolutely certain and completely unknowable. Heidegger wrote, "As soon as man comes to life, he is at once old enough to die," emphasizing that death is always present, part of who we are. Yet its timing and nature remain a mystery, making it unlike any other experience. Most of us avoid this reality, losing ourselves in routines and social norms, what Heidegger called the they self. In this passive state, We adopt the illusion of permanence, pretending death is distant and abstract. But Heidegger argued that this avoidance leads to inauthentic living. To live authentically, we must confront our mortality head-on. Heidegger called this being toward death, actively acknowledging life's finite nature. By embracing death, we take responsibility for our lives. Decisions gain weight, and life becomes a series of deliberate choices rather than passive motions. For Heidegger, this isn't despair, it's freedom. Understanding that time is limited makes it precious. You stop living for others or meaningless distractions and start living for yourself, fully aware of your finite existence. Death, Heidegger believed, is the ultimate individual experience. No one else can die your death for you. By facing this truth, you break free from illusions and live authentically, realizing that life's value lies in its impermanence. In eternal form, confronting death, he argued, can we truly live? Ironic process theory. Don't think about a white bear. Whatever you do, don't picture it. Odds are, the first thing that popped into your head was a white bear. This paradox is the essence of ironic process theory, a concept introduced by Daniel Wegener in the 1980s. It reveals a quirk of the mind. The more we try to suppress a thought, the more likely it is to intrude. But why does this happen? When we suppress a thought, the mind splits into two processes. The first actively tries to push the thought away. Don't think about the white bear. The second, unconscious process scans for the thought to ensure it doesn't slip through. Ironically, this monitoring keeps the thought alive, ready to resurface. Wegener proved this in experiments where participants were told not to think about a white bear. The harder they tried, the more often the thought appeared. This isn't just a mental quirk, it has real-world implications. Insomnia sufferers who try to suppress worry often find themselves wide awake. People on diets fixate on forbidden foods. Breakups linger because trying to forget an ex only makes them more prominent. Wegener offered a solution: distraction. Redirecting the mind to another focus, like thinking about a black cat, can reduce the intrusive thought's power. Letting thoughts pass rather than fighting them also helps, much like watching clouds drift in the sky. The lesson? Suppression fuels obsession. Instead of wrestling with your mind, let the thought come and go, because, like a stubborn white bear, overthrow it, the stronger it becomes. Moral desert. Do we truly deserve anything? The concept of moral desert questions whether people genuinely earn the rewards or punishments they receive. On the surface, it seems fair. Good actions deserve good outcomes, and bad actions deserve bad ones. But dig deeper, and this belief starts to unravel. Philosophers like John Rawls argue that much of what we consider deserved depends on factors beyond our control. In A Theory of Justice, Rawls points out that traits like intelligence, talents, and even moral character are shaped by luck, our upbringing, genetics, and environment. If these foundational aspects of who we are aren't chosen, how can we claim to deserve anything? For example, someone born into wealth may achieve success through hard work, but their opportunities were built on advantages they didn't earn. Conversely, someone born into poverty may struggle despite equal or greater effort. Moral desert assumes a level playing field, but life rarely provides one. Bernard Williams goes further, suggesting that morality shouldn't focus on rewarding or punishing individuals, but on creating systems that promote fairness and well-being. He sees deservingness as a distraction, often used to justify inequality rather than address it. Determinism complicates things further. If our actions are shaped by prior causes, biology, environment, and experience, how much control do we really have? If free will is an illusion, can anyone truly deserve their fate? This debate has real-world implications. Meritocracies claim to reward effort, but if effort itself depends on unequal conditions, is this justice? And in criminal justice, punishment based on desert ignores systemic factors that shape behavior. The bicameral mind. What if human consciousness is far younger than we think? This is the bold idea behind the bicameral mind, a theory proposed by Julian Jaynes in his 1976 book, The Origin of Consciousness, in the breakdown of the bicameral mind. Jaynes argued that ancient humans, as recently as 3,000 years ago, were not conscious as we are today. Instead, their minds operated in two chambers, one giving commands and the other obeying, interpreting these commands as the voices of gods. Jaynes pointed to texts like the Iliad, where characters lack introspection and attribute decisions to divine voices. He believed these weren't metaphors, but literal experiences, with one brain hemisphere producing commands and the other hearing them. This bicameral mind provided clear, authoritative guidance, essential for survival in chaotic early societies. Over time, societal complexity and the development of written language led to the breakdown of this system. As external pressures like wars and migrations increased, humans adapted, fostering introspection and the emergence of modern self-awareness. For Jaynes, this marked the birth of consciousness as we know it. Critics call the theory speculative, questioning its neurological basis and reliance on textual interpretation. However, Jaynes's ideas provoke profound questions. Is modern consciousness a relatively recent development shaped by history? Could it be more fragile and contingent than we assume? If consciousness once emerged from societal and environmental pressures, could it also fade under different conditions? Jaynes's theory forces us to consider whether our sense of self is an eternal human trait or a fleeting product of a particular moment in history. State of nature as war. Strip away laws, governments, and societal rules. What's left? For philosopher Thomas Hobbes, it's chaos, a brutal war of every man against every man. This is the state of nature, a world without authority, which Hobbes saw as humanity's raw, unfiltered reality. In his 1651 work Leviathan, Hobbes argued that life in the state of nature would be driven by fear and competition. Humans, motivated by self-interest and survival, would clash endlessly over resources and power. In such condition, he wrote, the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Why such chaos? Hobbes pointed to equality, not the noble kind, but the kind that makes everyone equally dangerous. Even the weakest can harm the strongest through cunning or alliances, creating perpetual mistrust. Without rules or authority to ensure safety, people would live in constant suspicion, ready to strike first. This isn't just theory. Hobbes pointed to civil wars and societal breakdowns as glimpses of the state of nature. Yet he didn't see humans as evil, just rational. In a world without order, survival demands preemptive conflict. Hobbes believed the only escape was the social contract, individuals surrendering some freedom to a sovereign authority, the Leviathan, in exchange for security and peace. This authority, wielding absolute power, keeps the chaos of the state of nature at bay. While critics argue Hobbes underestimated human cooperation, his vision resonates today. From political instability to international tensions, the shadow of the state of nature reminds us what's at stake. Hobbes challenges us to ask, what truly holds civilization together, and how far are we willing to go to preserve it? Panopticism. What if you were always being watched, but never knew when? Would you act differently? This is the essence of panopticism, a concept from philosopher Michel Foucault in Discipline and Punish. It reveals how the possibility of observation shapes behavior and extends control far beyond physical walls. Foucault was inspired by the Panopticon, a prison design by Jeremy Bentham. The design featured a circular structure with cells surrounding a central watchtower. Guards could observe prisoners without being seen, creating a state of conscious and permanent visibility. The genius wasn't in constant observation, but in making prisoners think they could be watched at any moment. Foucault expanded this into a metaphor for modern power. Panopticism, he argued, isn't about actual surveillance, it's about the fear of it. The mere possibility of being watched leads people to regulate themselves, turning surveillance into self-discipline. A real subjection, Foucault wrote, is born mechanically from a fictitious relation. This principle pervades modern life: security cameras, workplace monitoring, even social media. Do you post to express yourself or to shape how others perceive you? Panopticism shifts power from external enforcement to internal compliance. It also extends beyond technology. Schools, hospitals, and governments use observation and categorization to influence behavior. Foucault argued that modern societies moved from physical punishment to psychological control, subtle but effective. Panopticism raises critical questions. How much of our freedom is illusion? Who's watching, and why? Awareness of this dynamic offers a chance to resist. The power of panopticism isn't in being watched, it's in believing we are, and recognizing that belief is the first step toward reclaiming control. Fallenness of Dasein. We spend our lives scrolling, chasing fleeting pleasures, and following routines. But is this truly living? Martin Heidegger called this the fallenness of Dasein, revealing an unsettling truth about human existence. Much of what we do is a distraction from facing who we really are. In Being and Time, Heidegger introduces the concept of Dasein, meaning being there, or existence. Dasein represents the human condition, our unique capacity to question life and seek meaning. Yet, instead of confronting these profound questions, we fall into what Heidegger termed fallenness, a passive absorption in the trivial and superficial. Fallenness isn't about morality, it's an existential state. Heidegger describes it as being lost in the they, letting societal norms and expectations dictate our lives. We conform to what they think, say, and do, losing touch with our authentic selves. We curate perfect online personas, chase trends without questioning their value, and fill our days with distractions to avoid facing deeper truths. At its core, fallenness is a flight from anxiety. For Heidegger, anxiety isn't mere fear. It's the unsettling awareness of our freedom to shape life without a predetermined purpose. This realization exposes the void at the heart of existence. Instead of embracing this freedom, we retreat into routine and convention, avoiding the discomfort of authenticity. But anxiety, paradoxically, can liberate us. Heidegger believed it could jolt us out of fallenness, forcing us to confront our finitude and take responsibility for our choices. Authenticity lies not in rejecting society, but in consciously defining our own purpose. The undead God. God is dead. Nietzsche's unsettling proclamation in The Gay Science signaled the collapse of divine authority, leaving humanity untethered. But what if God isn't truly gone? What if God lingers, not alive, but undead? A shadow embedded in our morality, culture, and subconscious. This is the concept of the undead God, a deity stripped of power yet haunting our values and institutions. Nietzsche's warning wasn't about atheism's triumph, but the danger of clinging to systems rooted in a belief we've abandoned. He saw humanity as trapped in the remnants of old frameworks, unwilling to confront the void left behind. As he wrote, "What are these morals if they are not the shadows of God?" Shadows of shadows. The problem is stark. Without God, what justifies concepts like good and evil, justice and freedom? Nietzsche argued that these ideals, once grounded in divine command, now float unmoored. We reject religious authority, yet treat these values as sacred absolutes, even as their foundations crumble. Modern life offers unsettling proof. Ideals like equality and morality are upheld as self-evident truths, yet they remain tethered to theological roots we no longer acknowledge. The undead God lives on, shaping our world even as we deny its existence. Nietzsche didn't merely diagnose this crisis, he demanded action. He urged us to slay the undead God by re-evaluating values and creating new ones, free from inherited belief. This is the path of the Übermensch, forging meaning in a world without absolutes. Are you living under the shadow of an undead God? Or are you ready to confront the void and create meaning anew? Nietzsche's spectre challenges us. The choice is yours. Vanity of existence. Why do we strive and toil, knowing nothing lasts? This is the heart of Arthur Schopenhauer's concept of the vanity of existence, a stark reflection on the futility of life. For Schopenhauer, existence is a relentless cycle of striving, suffering, and inevitable decline. He wrote, "The vanity of existence is revealed in the whole form. Existence assumes, in the infiniteness of time and space, contrasted with the finiteness of the individual in both. We are fleeting beings, adrift in an infinite, uncaring cosmos." Schopenhauer argued that life is driven by the will to life, an insatiable force compelling us to survive, reproduce, and chase desires. Yet every fulfilled desire only gives way to new ones. All satisfaction, he declared, is only negative, the removal of a desire and its pain. This endless yearning mirrors Sisyphus, endlessly pushing his boulder uphill. In daily life, this truth becomes evident. A new achievement, possession, or recognition provides fleeting joy, but the satisfaction dissolves, leaving us wanting again. Even acts of creation, love, or legacy, Schopenhauer saw as attempts to mask the void. Time erodes all achievements. Even the grandest empires crumble. What has been and is no more, he wrote, always seems better than what is now. Schopenhauer didn't seek despair, but clarity. He believed recognizing life's futility allowed us to escape its grip. Through art, philosophy, and especially music, which offered moments of liberation from endless striving. Apophatic theology. God cannot be described, only negated. This is the foundation of apophatic theology, or negative theology, which argues that any attempt to describe God is inherently flawed. Not because the descriptions are false, but because human language is incapable of capturing the infinite and transcendent nature of the divine. The concept dates back to early Christian thinkers, like Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, who wrote, "The highest of all things is neither light, nor darkness, nor truth, nor falsehood. It is beyond all assertion and denial alike." To understand God, he argued, we must first unlearn everything we assume to know. Apophatic theology rejects positive descriptions like God is good or God is loving. These statements, it argues, reduce God to human terms, confining the divine to our limited understanding. Instead, it focuses on what God is not finite, not material, not bound by time, not comprehensible. It's like staring at the sun. You can't look directly at its brilliance, but you can perceive its effects. This approach is unsettling because it strips away certainty. If God is unknowable, how do we pray, worship, or build faith? Apophatic theologians suggest that the mystery itself is the point. By embracing what we cannot know, we approach a more reverent understanding of the divine. In contrast to cataphatic theology, which describes God through positive attributes, apophatic theology insists such efforts are limiting. As the mystic Meister Eckhart said, God is greater than God. The last man. Have you ever considered what the end of humanity might look like? Not in chaos, but in comfort. A world where ambition, greatness, and meaning itself have vanished. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Friedrich Nietzsche introduces the concept of the last man. This is not a vision of extinction, but of spiritual stagnation. The last man represents a society that values comfort and safety above all else, abandoning the pursuit of greatness. He trades the struggle for meaning for shallow pleasures, content in mediocrity. The last man says, "We have invented happiness, but this happiness is hollow. It's a life devoid of dreams, risks, or aspirations, a perpetual avoidance of discomfort." He asks no profound questions, seeks no higher purpose, and is satisfied with mere existence, living without challenge or depth. In stark contrast, Nietzsche's Übermensch, or Overman, embraces chaos and struggle, forging his own values and transcending mediocrity. Where the Overman sees life as an opportunity for creativity and growth, the last man reduces it to survival and routine. Nietzsche's warning resonates today. The obsession with comfort, the endless pursuit of distraction, and the fear of failure reflect the very retreat from meaning he feared. The last man is not evil or malicious. He is simply tired. Tired of striving, questioning, and enduring. He represents humanity's quiet decline into irrelevance, where mediocrity replaces ambition. Master-slave dialectic. Every relationship is a struggle for recognition. This is the essence of the master-slave dialectic, one of Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel's most profound ideas from phenomenology of spirit. It's not just about domination, it's about power, dependence, and the need to be seen. Hegel begins with two individuals meeting. Both crave validation, but for selfhood to exist, each needs their existence acknowledged by the other. This creates conflict, a life and death struggle for recognition. The outcome? A hierarchy. One becomes the master, the other the slave. At first, the master appears victorious, commanding while the slave obeys. But Hegel reveals a paradox. The master's power is hollow because it relies entirely on the slave's recognition. True transformation, Hegel argues, happens through the slave's labor. By shaping the material world, the slave gains self-awareness and a deeper understanding of reality. As Hegel writes, through work, the slave becomes conscious of what he truly is. This dialectic isn't just about literal masters and slaves. It's a metaphor for power dynamics in all human relationships, from history's feudal systems to modern economic and social hierarchies. It's also deeply personal, evident in the dynamics of employers and employees, parents and children, even lovers. Recognition, Hegel shows, is rarely equal. But Hegel's insight goes further. True recognition, he suggests, comes from mutual acknowledgement, not domination. It's a delicate balance where both individuals affirm each other as equals. The Gnostic demiurge. What if the world you see, everything you believe is real, was crafted not by a benevolent creator, but by a flawed, malevolent architect? In Gnostic philosophy, this being is the demiurge, a lesser deity marked by ignorance and arrogance. Far from the all-good God of many religions, the Gnostics saw the demiurge as a blind craftsman who shaped the material world not out of perfection, but error. They believed this flawed creation was a prison designed to trap souls in suffering. The term demiurge comes from the Greek demiurgos, meaning craftsman. While Plato used it to describe a divine creator organizing chaos, the Gnostics reimagined the demiurge as a false god. In texts like the Apocryphon of John, the demiurge, named Yaldabaoth, is depicted as a monstrous figure, a cosmic accident declaring, "I am God and there is no other." For the Gnostics, the true divine essence lies beyond this flawed world, in a spiritual realm of purity. Gnostics believed humanity carries a divine spark, a fragment of the true God trapped within the demiurge's creation. Salvation, they argued, isn't found in obeying this false God or perfecting life within his flawed world. Instead, it comes through gnosis, spiritual awakening. By recognizing the cosmic illusion and reclaiming the divine spark, one can achieve liberation. The demiurge's myth resonates today. Philosophers like Arthur Schopenhauer and sci-fi narratives like The Matrix explore similar ideas of a flawed or controlled reality. The Gnostics leave us with a haunting challenge. If this world is an illusion, are we brave enough to confront it and seek what lies beyond? Transvaluation of values. What if the values you hold sacred, goodness, humility, selflessness, weren't designed to uplift you, but to control you? Friedrich Nietzsche argued this had already happened, calling for a transvaluation of values, a radical rethinking of morality. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra and the Antichrist, Nietzsche identified two types of morality: master morality and slave morality. Master morality, rooted in ancient aristocratic societies, celebrated strength, vitality, and achievement. Good was synonymous with power, while bad reflected weakness. But history, he claimed, saw a dramatic inversion. The oppressed, whom Nietzsche called the slaves, overthrew their rulers by creating a new moral framework. Ambition, dominance, and self-assertion were rebranded as evil, while humility, meekness, and self-denial were elevated as good. Nietzsche called this reversal an act of ressentiment, a moral system born of resentment. This, Nietzsche believed, suppressed human potential. Slave morality, institutionalized through Christianity and modern ethics, stifled humanity's creative and life-affirming instincts. Man would rather will nothingness than not will at all, he wrote, critiquing how guilt and submission replaced vitality and self-overcoming. Nietzsche's solution: a transvaluation of values, a complete redefinition of morality. He envisioned the Übermensch, or overman, an individual who creates their own values, unshackled by inherited moral codes. This wasn't a call for cruelty or tyranny, but a rejection of morality that glorifies weakness over strength. The will to power. What drives us? For Friedrich Nietzsche, the answer was primal: the will to power. Beneath every action, ambition, and desire lies this fundamental force, a drive not merely to survive, but to assert, overcome, and create. The will to power isn't about domination in the simplistic sense. It's deeper than wealth or control. Nietzsche saw it as the essence of life itself, a force pushing every living thing to grow and strive for mastery. As he writes in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "Where I found the living, there I found the will to power." From plants reaching for sunlight to humanity's greatest achievements, this drive animates existence. Unlike Darwin's survival of the fittest, Nietzsche's will to power isn't static. Survival is merely existing. The will to power is dynamic. It seeks to transcend limitations, impose meaning on chaos, and push boundaries. It fuels our creativity, ambition, and even conflict. This drive, Nietzsche believed, is the root of life's transformative energy. But the will to power isn't just external. It's an internal struggle. Nietzsche saw self-mastery as the path to becoming the Übermensch, or overman. The Übermensch transcends societal norms, creating their own values. In The Will to Power, he wrote, "To impose upon becoming the character of being, that is the supreme will to power." Critics have misinterpreted Nietzsche's ideas as justifying tyranny, but he wasn't advocating for selfishness. The will to power isn't inherently good or evil. It's neutral, shaped by how we use it. In our ambitions, challenges, and creativity, the will to power is at work. For Nietzsche, life isn't about discovering meaning. It's about creating it. That spark to push boundaries? That's the pulse of life itself. Divine hiddenness. If God exists, why does the world feel so silent? Why do so many seek divine presence and find only absence? These questions define the problem of divine hiddenness, a challenge to faith, belief, and the very nature of God. Philosopher John L. Schellenberg formalized this argument, asking, if a perfectly loving God exists, why wouldn't that presence be unmistakable? In Divine Hiddenness and Human Reason, he argues that a loving God would prevent reasonable non-belief. Yet, many sincere seekers of truth remain unconvinced. Is this silence evidence that God isn't there, or that God doesn't care? Some theists respond that divine hiddenness preserves human freedom. If God's existence were undeniable, belief might feel coerced, undermining genuine faith. But critics, including Schellenberg, counter that freedom and knowledge aren't incompatible. Just as knowing a loved one exists doesn't eliminate the freedom to choose them. Knowing God exists wouldn't negate free will. It would enrich it. Others suggest hiddenness serves a purpose, such as fostering spiritual growth or testing faith. Yet for many, especially those whose doubts arise from honest seeking, these explanations feel insufficient. Divine hiddenness also intensifies the problem of evil. If suffering already challenges God's goodness, why remain silent in humanity's pain? Wouldn't clarity offer comfort or hope? This isn't just an intellectual issue, it's deeply personal. For those struggling with unanswered prayers, the silence can feel like abandonment. But some interpret it as an invitation to question, to seek, and to grow. Inherent meaninglessness. Your life has no meaning, neither does mine. The universe doesn't care about your dreams or struggles, and yet, this might be the most liberating truth you'll ever encounter. Existentialist thinkers like Nietzsche, Sartre, and Camus argue that the universe offers no built-in purpose. Sartre stated, "Man is condemned to be free," meaning we exist without objective purpose, left to create meaning ourselves. But confronting the void isn't easy. Camus called this tension the absurd condition, the clash between our desire for meaning and the universe's indifference. In the myth of Sisyphus, Camus likened life to a man eternally pushing a boulder uphill, only for it to roll back down. The struggle is pointless, yet Sisyphus's defiance transforms his suffering into freedom. Camus concludes, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. What does this mean for us? Inherent meaninglessness isn't a problem to fix, but a reality to embrace. Without cosmic rules dictating purpose, we're free to create our own. Every choice gains weight because we give it significance. Whether it's art, relationships, or moments of joy, these aren't gifts from the universe. They're victories carved from chaos. The void doesn't imprison you. It sets you free. In a meaningless world, your choices matter more than ever. Ego death. Who are you? Not your name, your job, or even your memories. Strip those away, and what's left? Ego death offers a haunting answer. The dissolution of the self, where the boundaries between you and the world vanish, leaving only raw existence. Ego death is central to mystical traditions, Eastern philosophies, and modern psychology. In Buddhism, it aligns with anatta, or no self, challenging the idea of a permanent identity. Hinduism describes it as realizing the self, jiva, is an illusion, revealing the oneness of Brahman. Both see shedding the ego as the path to enlightenment. Carl Jung explored ego death through psychology, linking it to individuation, a process where the ego confronts the unconscious and dissolves illusions of separation. He called it a confrontation with the self, revealing something far greater than the individual. But ego death isn't just theoretical, it's a profound, often unsettling experience. Many describe it as the loss of their I, whether through meditation, spiritual practice, or psychedelic journeys. Timothy Leary called it the complete transcendence of self, a merging with the infinite. Why seek such an experience? Ego death dismantles the illusions we cling to, our separateness, our roles, our fears. What's left is a deep sense of unity with all things, a clarity that's both liberating and transformative. Yet it's not without challenges. Letting go of the ego can feel like annihilation as the self resists its own undoing. But on the other side lies freedom, a release from desires and attachments. No self-doctrine. Who are you? You might say your name, your memories, or the sense of you at your core. But what if that self is an illusion, a story your mind creates? This is the claim of the no-self doctrine, a cornerstone of Buddhist philosophy. Central to this doctrine is anatta, the denial of a permanent, unchanging self. The Buddha rejected the notion of a core you behind your thoughts and actions. Instead, he described human existence as 5 aggregates: body, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. These elements create the illusion of a cohesive self, but no central piece holds them together. Imagine a river. It looks continuous, but up close, it's a flow of constantly changing water. The self, the Buddha argued, is just like that, an ever-shifting process, not a fixed entity. This perspective has profound implications. If there's no permanent self, what happens to identity, attachment, or suffering? Much of our pain, the Buddha taught, stems from clinging to desires, egos, and the illusion of permanence. Realizing anatta allows us to let go of this clinging and find liberation. Centuries later, philosopher David Hume echoed this view. He wrote, "I never can catch myself without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception." Like the Buddha, Hume found no evidence of a fixed self, only fleeting impressions. Solipsism. What if you're the only conscious being in existence? This is the unsettling idea of solipsism, the belief that nothing outside your own mind can be known to exist. The people you see, the world you live in, even the universe itself, could all be constructs of your consciousness. And here's the chilling part. There's no way to disprove it. The roots of solipsism trace back to ancient philosophy, but gain prominence through René Descartes. In his meditations on first philosophy, Descartes doubted everything: his senses, memories, and the physical world. The only certainty he found was his own mind. Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. For Descartes, this was the foundation of knowledge. Solipsism, however, stops there. It rejects the external guarantees Descartes proposed, such as God validating the world's reality. Instead, solipsism argues that only your thoughts, perceptions, and consciousness are certain. Everything else is suspect. The problem is simple yet profound. Every experience you have is filtered through your mind. How can you prove that the people you talk to aren't just projections of your imagination? That the world wasn't created moments ago, complete with implanted memories to make it feel real? Philosophers like Ludwig Wittgenstein challenged solipsism, arguing that thoughts and language are inherently shaped by interaction with others. Without a shared world, even the structure of thought would collapse. Personal identity paradox. Who are you? Not your name, your face, or even your memories. Who are you, truly? The personal identity paradox forces us to question whether the self we hold onto is as stable as we think. At its core, this paradox asks, what makes you you? Is it your body, your memories, or your personality? John Locke, in his essay concerning human understanding, argued that personal identity is rooted in memory. If you recall being the child who rode a bike or the teenager who graduated, that continuity defines your identity. But what happens when memory fails? Do forgotten moments cease to be part of you? Critics like Thomas Reid highlighted this flaw, noting that if identity depends solely on memory, a person could paradoxically both be and not be the same individual, depending on which memories they retain. Consider the ship of Theseus. If every plank of a ship is replaced, is it still the same ship? Now apply that to yourself. Your cells regenerate, your personality evolves, and your memories shift. Are you the same you were 10 years ago, or even yesterday? Modern neuroscience complicates things further. The brain is a constantly changing network, with no static self, but a dynamic process. Philosopher Derek Parfit argued in Reasons and Persons that identity is an illusion. Instead of obsessing over being the same person, we should focus on psychological continuity, the fragile connections linking past, present, and future selves. Open individualism. What if you were everyone? Not metaphorically, but literally. Every life ever lived, every life yet to come. This is open individualism, a radical idea proposed by philosopher Daniel Kolak. suggesting there is only one consciousness shared by all beings. In his book I Am You, 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓎 argues that individual identities are illusions, much like waves on an ocean. Beneath the surface, we're all part of the same vast, unified consciousness. Most of us accept closed individualism, the belief that each person has a distinct, separate self that begins at birth and ends at death. Open individualism challenges this, comparing the self to walls in a house. These walls seem to define space, but the air flows freely through, undivided. Similarly, what we see as distinct selves are just temporary perspectives of the same universal awareness. This idea isn't new. In Hinduism, Brahman represents a universal self, with the individual soul, Atman, as inseparable from it. Buddhism's concept of anatta, or no self, also denies permanent identity. Open individualism reimagines these ancient insights through a modern lens, but the implications are profound. If we are all one, does individuality matter? 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓎 suggests it deepens responsibility. Harming another is harming yourself. Helping another is self-directed compassion. Critics argue the idea is unprovable, but 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓎 counters that separateness is just a convincing illusion, like the moon, which seems to glow but only reflects sunlight. Ego tunnel. You think you know yourself, your thoughts, your feelings, the world around you. But what if it's all an illusion? Thomas Metzinger's The Ego Tunnel challenges this assumption, arguing that the self isn't real, not in the way you think. Instead, your sense of you is a virtual construct, created by your brain to navigate reality. Metzinger writes, "No such thing as a self exists in the world. Nobody ever had or was a self." The ego tunnel is his metaphor for how consciousness works. Imagine your mind as a tunnel through which you experience the world. Everything inside feels vivid and immediate. Colors, sounds, emotions. But what you're experiencing isn't reality itself. It's a simulation, crafted by your brain from limited data. Beyond the tunnel lies the raw, incomprehensible complexity of the universe, far beyond what your senses can perceive. Why does your brain do this? Survival. The ego tunnel simplifies reality to help you make quick decisions, form relationships, and find meaning. But it also creates the illusion that you're a unified, separate being, navigating an objective world. This raises profound questions. If the self is an illusion, do you truly control your actions? If reality is filtered through a simulation, how can you trust what's real? Metzinger suggests that recognizing the ego tunnel frees us to reshape our sense of self and live more consciously. Loneliness isn't just being alone, it's something far deeper, something absolute. Absolute loneliness is not the absence of company. It is the realization that no one can ever truly know or experience your existence as you do. No matter how many relationships you form, how deeply you connect, there will always be an unbridgeable gap between your consciousness and everyone else's. Philosophers and existentialists have long grappled with this idea. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that human beings exist in a state of isolation, where even in the presence of others, we are fundamentally alone. The mind is a private prison. Your thoughts, feelings, and inner world are yours alone, inaccessible to anyone else. Others can observe you, speak to you, even love you, but they will never fully step inside your being. Neuroscience reinforces this bleak reality. Your experiences are locked within the structure of your brain, filtered through your perceptions, emotions, and memories. No one else will ever see the world exactly as you do. Even language, our greatest tool for connection, is limited. Words can only approximate feelings. They can never fully transmit the raw experience of being you. This realization is unsettling. It means that even in a crowded room, even in the deepest moments of intimacy, there is a part of you that remains untouched, unseen. Appearance versus reality. What if the world you see isn't the world as it truly is? What if everything you experience, colors, sounds, even time, is a carefully crafted illusion? The tension between appearance and reality is a profound question in philosophy, challenging us to confront the idea that our senses might deceive us. Plato captured this in his allegory of the cave. Prisoners chained in darkness see only shadows on a wall and mistake them for reality. Plato argued that most of us live like those prisoners, confusing appearances for truth. For him, true reality lies beyond the senses, in a realm of unchanging, eternal forms accessible only through reason. Centuries later, Descartes pushed this further. In Meditations on First Philosophy, he doubted everything: his senses, body, even the world's existence. Could it all be an illusion, the work of an evil demon? His skepticism led to one certainty: cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. For Descartes, consciousness was the only undeniable reality. Modern science adds new layers to this puzzle. Quantum mechanics reveals particles in superpositions, altered by observation. Neuroscience shows that what we perceive is reconstructed by our brains. Colors are interpretations, not inherent properties. Even time, as Einstein showed, is relative, shaped by gravity and motion. Yet we trust our senses. We live by what we see and hear, even though illusions and technologies like virtual reality blur the line between real and artificial. Philosophers like Kant remind us that we can't access the world as it truly is, only how it appears to us. Zeno's paradox: if you set out to cross a room, will you ever reach the other side? It seems obvious. You take a step, then another, and eventually you're there. But according to Zeno of Elea, you'll never make it. You'll be trapped in an infinite series of steps that grow smaller and smaller, forever moving forward, but never arriving. This is Zeno's paradox of motion, and it challenges our most basic understanding of reality. Zeno's dichotomy. Paradox argues that before reaching the other side, you must first reach the halfway point. But before that, you must reach halfway to that point, and so on, dividing each step infinitely. If each step takes time, how can you ever complete an infinite series? Another paradox, Achilles and the tortoise, makes this more vivid. Achilles, the fastest runner, gives a tortoise a head start. By the time Achilles reaches the tortoise's starting point, the tortoise has moved ahead. This process repeats infinitely, suggesting Achilles can never overtake the tortoise, no matter how fast he runs. These paradoxes don't deny motion. They reveal the tension between perception and mathematical reasoning. The ancient Greeks were baffled by this, but calculus, developed by Newton and Leibniz, showed that infinite sequences can sum to finite results. Achilles overtakes the tortoise, and you cross the room, not because Zeno was wrong, but because his paradoxes highlighted the limits of early mathematics. Zeno's puzzles endure because they push us to question infinity, continuity, and reality itself. The next time you take a step, consider this. Even the simplest motion contains infinite complexity, bridging the gap between logic and experience. Infinite regress problem. What explains the universe? The question seems simple, until it isn't. Every answer demands another, like pulling on a thread that never ends. This is the infinite regress problem, one of philosophy's most haunting dilemmas. Infinite regress occurs when every explanation depends on something else, creating an endless chain of why. Aristotle identified this in metaphysics, asking if every cause requires a prior cause, does the chain stretch infinitely? To solve this, he proposed a prime mover, an uncaused cause that sets everything in motion. But is this a solution or a convenient stopgap? The problem surfaces everywhere we seek ultimate explanations. In morality, if actions are right because they follow rules, what justifies the rules? If rules rely on principles, what justifies the principles? The regress spirals endlessly, undermining any solid foundation for ethics. In epistemology, the issue is equally troubling. Claims of knowledge rely on reasons, which themselves need justification. Philosopher Laurence Bonjour called this a vicious regress, making certainty seem impossible. How do we escape this trap? Foundationalism argues for self-evident truths needing no justification, as Descartes did with "I think, therefore I am." Coherentism, by contrast, suggests that beliefs justify each other in a web-like structure, though critics argue this feels circular. Some, like Paul Tillich, embrace infinite regress as inherent, suggesting the search itself has value. Hyperbolic doubt. What can you know for certain? This is the question at the heart of hyperbolic doubt, a method of radical skepticism introduced by René Descartes. It begins by doubting everything: your senses, memories, even the world around you. Descartes used this method not to unravel reality, but to uncover a single, unshakable truth. In his Meditations on First Philosophy, Descartes argued that to discover absolute certainty, you must discard anything that could be false. He wrote, "I will regard as false anything that is not entirely certain and indubitable." He began by questioning his senses. Can you trust what you see or feel? A stick in water appears bent. Distant objects seem smaller. If senses deceive even once, how can they be trusted at all? Next, he doubted his thoughts and memories. Could they be illusions, like dreams? In dreams, we often feel certain, only to wake and realize we were wrong. Then, Descartes introduced the evil demon hypothesis. What if a powerful deceiver manipulated your reality, ensuring everything you believe is false? But even in this extreme doubt, Descartes found one undeniable truth: the act of doubting itself. If he was doubting, he must exist. From this realization came his famous conclusion: cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Existential angst. You're alive, conscious. But why? The moment you confront this question, you feel it. A hollow unease, a weight pressing down. This is existential angst, a discomfort not from fear of death, but from the sheer burden of life itself. Søren Kierkegaard, the father of existentialism, explored this in the concept of anxiety. For him, angst arises from the realization of our freedom, the ability to choose, define ourselves, and shape our future. But with that freedom comes a terrifying truth. There are no guarantees, no ultimate guide. Kierkegaard wrote, "Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom." This dizziness stems from possibility. Imagine standing on the edge of a cliff. Part of you fears falling, but another part recognizes that you could jump. That unsettling awareness, that your choices are yours alone, is the essence of existential angst. Jean-Paul Sartre expanded on this idea, calling humans condemned to be free. Without a divine plan or predetermined purpose, we must create our own meaning. This freedom is liberating, yet paralyzing. Sartre wrote, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." But what if we don't know what to make? What if the weight of freedom feels unbearable? Metaphysical rebellion. What happens when someone refuses to accept the world, not just socially or politically, but at its core? This is metaphysical rebellion, a concept Albert Camus explores in The Rebel. It's not merely resistance to injustice, it's defiance against the absurdity of existence itself. Camus begins with a harsh truth: the human condition is absurd. We seek meaning in a universe that offers none. This clash between our longing for purpose and the cosmos's indifference is the absurd. Metaphysical rebellion arises when someone refuses to surrender to this reality. But rebellion isn't despair. It's an act of defiance. Camus writes, "I rebel, therefore we exist." Instead of succumbing to life's lack of inherent meaning, the rebel creates their own. It's a challenge to the universe, an assertion that life can still be lived with passion and authenticity. Consider Prometheus from Greek mythology. He defied the gods by stealing fire for humanity, not just rejecting authority, but challenging the foundations of existence itself. Similarly, The metaphysical rebel refuses to accept a world devoid of meaning, striving instead to create values in the face of absurdity. Yet Camus warns of rebellion's dangers. When rebellion turns dogmatic, it can lead to tyranny. Revolutions that sought liberation often imposed new forms of oppression. Camus urges rebels to embrace uncertainty and reject absolute systems. For Camus, rebellion isn't a solution, but a way of being, a refusal to stop questioning existence. The only way to deal with an unfree world, he writes, is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. And in that defiance, we find freedom. Aletheia and oblivion. What if the greatest truths aren't hidden but forgotten? The ancient Greek concept of aletheia, truth as unconcealment, suggests that reality isn't something we create, but something we uncover. It's a process of peeling back the veils of oblivion to reveal what has been obscured. In Greek, aletheia means the state of not being hidden. For philosophers like Heidegger, truth isn't static or absolute. It's an ongoing revelation of essence. Opposite this is lethe, meaning oblivion or forgetfulness. In mythology, the river Lethe caused those who drank from it to forget everything. Oblivion here isn't just forgetting facts. It's losing touch with deeper realities, the dulling of existence by routine or distraction. Modern life, Heidegger argued, often traps us in lethe. Technology, social norms, and endless distractions bury truth beneath layers of convenience and noise. Truth becomes hidden not because it's complex, but because we stop seeking it. Consider a forest. To a hurried observer, it's just trees. But to someone who pauses and looks deeply, the forest unveils its richness, its intricate ecosystems, its quiet vitality. This is aletheia in action, the forgotten truth emerging from oblivion. Yet unveiling truth is never complete. For every truth revealed, others remain hidden. Truth is a pursuit, a continual struggle against the pull of lethe. As Heidegger wrote, to be is to stand in the clearing where beings reveal themselves. The uncanny. Why do things that are almost human disturb us more than things that are not human at all? The answer lies in the uncanny, a concept that explores the unsettling tension between familiarity and alienation, when something feels close to home but isn't quite right. Sigmund Freud explored this in his 1919 essay, Das Unheimliche, meaning the unhome-like. For Freud, the uncanny arises when the familiar becomes strange, provoking deep psychological unease. It's the lifelike doll, the too real robot, or the shadow in the mirror that doesn't quite follow. These moments disrupt our sense of reality, exposing its fragility. Freud linked the uncanny to repressed fears and forgotten memories. He called it the return of the repressed, where unsettling experiences bring hidden anxieties to the surface. A human-like robot, for example, might force us to confront the fragility of life and the line between human and machine. Japanese roboticist Masahiro Mori expanded on this with his uncanny valley theory. Mori observed that as robots look more human, our affinity grows, until they become almost human, but not quite. At this point, they evoke discomfort rather than empathy, as their near-human qualities feel disturbingly off. The uncanny is central to art and storytelling. From the animated corpse in Frankenstein to the eerie twins in The Shining, it challenges the boundaries of identity and reality. It reminds us how much we rely on predictability, and when that's disrupted, it shakes our understanding of the world. Phenomenological reduction. What if you could strip away all assumptions, beliefs, and biases until only raw, unfiltered experience remained? This is the essence of phenomenological reduction, a method introduced by philosopher Edmund Husserl to uncover the true nature of consciousness. Husserl believed we mistake our interpretations of the world for reality itself. Our minds constantly color experiences with preconceived notions, cultural influences, and personal history. To see the world as it truly is in consciousness, Husserl proposed bracketing, or 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓐𝓎, suspending all judgments and assumptions. The process starts with abandoning what Husserl called the natural attitude, our default belief in the world's external existence. Instead, we focus purely on how the world appears in consciousness. Husserl wrote, "We must free ourselves from the prejudice of the existence of the world. This doesn't deny the world's existence, it seeks to reveal how it is experienced." Phenomenological reduction shifts focus from objects to the acts of consciousness that make them appear. For example, when you see a tree, you're not just perceiving an object, you're experiencing sensory data, memory, and interpretation working together. Husserl's method uncovers these layers, showing how experience is shaped by the dynamic relationship between observer and observed. A key insight is that consciousness is always intentional. It's not passive, but actively directed at something, whether perceiving, imagining, or feeling. By examining this relationship, phenomenology reveals the structures of experience. Though critics question whether we can truly set aside all biases, Husserl argued that striving for clarity offers profound insights. His method influenced thinkers like Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, who expanded on phenomenology's transformative potential. Ding an sich. What is the true nature of reality? Do we see the world as it truly is, or only as it appears to us? Immanuel Kant tackled this question with the concept of the Ding an sich, the thing in itself. It challenges everything we think we know about existence. In his critique of pure reason, Kant distinguished between the world as it appears to us and the world as it is in itself. According to him, we never experience reality directly. Instead, what we perceive, space, time, cause, and effect, is shaped by the structures of our minds. These aren't properties of the external world, but frameworks we impose on it. As Kant wrote, we can never transcend the limits of our own faculties to reach the thing in itself. The Ding an sich represents reality's true nature beyond human perception. Take a tree, for example. You see its shape, color, and texture, but these qualities are interpretations by your senses. The tree's essence, its ultimate reality, remains hidden. If we can never know the thing in itself, how can we claim to know anything? Kant argued that while we're limited to appearances, our shared cognitive framework ensures consistency, allowing us to navigate the world effectively. Reality may be unknowable, but it is coherent. This concept resonates with modern science. In quantum mechanics, particles exist in undefined states until observed, echoing Kant's insight that ultimate reality eludes direct experience. Inverted spectrum. What if the red you see looks entirely different to someone else, but you'd never know? This is the inverted spectrum, a thought experiment that questions our understanding of perception and the limits of human knowledge. First introduced by John Locke in an essay concerning human understanding, 1690, the inverted spectrum imagines two people who both call the sky blue and stop at a red light. But what one person sees as blue, the other might see as green. Their perceptions are inverted, yet their behavior is identical, making it impossible to detect the difference. At its core, this highlights the problem of qualia, the raw, subjective experience of perception. When you see red, how do you know it's the same as someone else's red? The inverted spectrum suggests you don't and can't. Modern neuroscience reveals that color perception is tied to wavelengths of light processed in the brain's visual cortex. But the brain doesn't just record data, it constructs our experience of color. If that construction varies between individuals, it remains unknowable, locked inside our minds. This thought experiment extends beyond color, touching on the hard problem of consciousness described by David Chalmers. If subjective experience is inaccessible, how can we truly understand other minds? Could artificial intelligence simulate human behavior without ever experiencing consciousness? Could it have its own inverted spectrum? Moral luck. If morality depends on choice, how much control do we really have over being good or bad? What if the outcomes of our actions, shaped by forces beyond our control, define how we're judged? This is the unsettling concept of moral luck, introduced by philosopher Thomas Nagel, which challenges the fairness of our moral judgments. Nagel asks, how much of morality is shaped by luck? Even when we evaluate someone's intentions, we often judge them based on consequences they didn't fully control. Take two drivers texting while driving. One arrives home safely, the other causes a fatal accident. Their actions are the same, but society condemns one as reckless while excusing the other. Is that fair? Moral luck comes in forms. Resultant luck judges outcomes, as in the driver's case. Circumstantial luck depends on the situations people face. Like someone never tested morally versus someone forced to make a difficult choice. Constitutive luck refers to traits we're born with, like courage or impulsiveness. Are we responsible for qualities shaped by genetics and upbringing? This concept raises profound questions. If so much of morality depends on factors outside our control, can anyone truly deserve blame or praise? Critics argue that accepting moral luck undermines accountability, but Nagel suggests it highlights the complexity of moral judgment. He writes, where there is moral judgment, there is an inescapable tension between what is within our control and what is not. Veil of ignorance. If you had to design a society without knowing your place in it, what kind of rules would you choose? This is the veil of ignorance, a thought experiment introduced by philosopher John Rawls in A Theory of Justice. It's a radical framework for fairness, forcing us to imagine justice without bias or privilege. Rawls asks us to envision the original position, a hypothetical scenario where we create society's rules while behind the veil of ignorance. Here's the catch. You don't know your gender, race, class, abilities, or future wealth. You could be anyone, a billionaire or someone living in poverty. This uncertainty, Rawls argues, would lead us to design a fundamentally fair society, avoiding rules that favor any one group, since we wouldn't know if we'd belong to it. From this, Rawls proposes two principles of justice. First, everyone should have equal access to the most extensive basic rights and freedoms, like freedom of speech and thought. Second, social and economic inequalities are only acceptable if they benefit the least advantaged. This is the difference principle, ensuring the vulnerable are protected. The veil of ignorance strips away personal bias. It's not about altruism, it's about rational self-interest under uncertainty. If you could be born into any position, you'd want a world where every position offers dignity and opportunity. Critics argue it's too idealistic or imposes redistributive justice at the expense of liberty. But Rawls's thought experiment challenges us to confront existing systems and ask, if I didn't know my place, would this still feel fair? The veil of ignorance isn't just a tool for imagining fairness, it's a vision of how justice could be. Moral non-cognitivism. When you say stealing is wrong, are you stating a fact or expressing how you feel? Moral non-cognitivism challenges us to rethink morality, arguing that moral statements express emotions, attitudes, or commands rather than objective truths. Emotivism, a key branch of non-cognitivism championed by A.J. Ayer, claims that moral statements are emotional expressions. Saying stealing is wrong is akin to saying, "Boo, stealing." Similarly, helping others is good translates to, "Yay, helping." In language, truth, and logic, Ayer argued that moral statements express feelings but do not state facts. Prescriptivism, led by R.M. Hare, goes further. Hare argued that moral statements are not just emotional outbursts, but also commands. Saying, "You should help others," isn't describing a truth, it's prescribing behavior, telling others what they ought to do. But if moral statements aren't true or false, how do we debate morality? Non-cognitivists argue that moral debates are about persuasion, not evidence. When you say, "Stealing is wrong," you're trying to influence someone's attitude or behavior, not pointing to objective facts. Critics worry this makes morality subjective and arbitrary. Non-cognitivists counter that morality has always been rooted in human emotions and shared experiences, not universal truths. Moral statements, they argue, serve to connect us, guide behavior, and promote social cohesion. Take the example of littering. When you say, "That's wrong," you're not stating a cosmic fact. You're expressing disapproval and encouraging others to act differently. Mackey's error theory. We often think of morality as universal, objective, and eternal. But what if that's all a mistake? JL. Mackey's error theory argues exactly that. Our moral judgments are built on an illusion. In ethics, inventing right and wrong, Mackey boldly claims, there are no objective values. When we say murder is wrong or kindness is good, we're not describing facts about the world. Instead, we're projecting our emotions and cultural norms onto reality. Morality feels objective, but for Mackey, this is a shared error. Mackey defends this with two arguments. First, the argument from relativity. Moral beliefs vary across cultures and history. Practices one society condemns, another celebrates. This moral diversity suggests that values aren't universal. They're constructed by societies to serve their needs. Second, the argument from queerness. If objective moral facts existed, they would be unlike anything else in the universe. Strange, inexplicable entities. How would we perceive them? Mackey argues, it's far more plausible that morality arises from human emotions and social agreements than from metaphysical truths. But Mackey doesn't reject morality itself. He acknowledges that moral language and feelings are real. He simply argues they're human creations, not universal truths. For example, kindness is good isn't an absolute fact. It's a value we've embraced because it fosters cooperation and harmony. The 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓐 dilemma. Is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it's good? This is the 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓐 dilemma, a 2,000-year-old question that challenges the foundation of morality. Plato introduces this dilemma in 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓐, where Socrates asks, is the pious loved by the gods because it is pious, or is it pious because it is loved by the gods? This deceptively simple question splits morality into two unsettling possibilities. The first option is that something is good simply because God commands it. If true, morality becomes arbitrary. If God had commanded hatred instead of kindness, would hatred then be good? This view reduces morality to divine whim, stripping it of intrinsic value. The second option is that God commands something because it is good. Here, morality has intrinsic worth independent of God. But this means morality exists outside of divine authority, making God unnecessary for moral truths and undermining the idea of God as the ultimate moral source. The 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓐 dilemma creates a paradox. Either morality is arbitrary, dictated by divine command, or it exists independently, diminishing God's role. Theists have proposed a third solution, that morality flows from God's nature, which is inherently good. Yet critics argue this merely shifts the problem. God's nature still determines morality arbitrarily. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant avoided this issue by grounding morality in human reason rather than divine will. Secular thinkers argue morality arises from empathy, cooperation, and shared values, making divine authority unnecessary. Christian mortalism. Most of us assume the soul is immortal, a core belief in mainstream Christianity. But what if that's wrong? Christian mortalism, a theological perspective, challenges the idea of inherent eternal life, asserting instead that immortality is not a natural trait, but a gift from God. Christian mortalism holds that humans are mortal beings, and death is a true cessation of consciousness, what some call soul sleep. Eternal life, in this view, isn't guaranteed, but depends on God's power to resurrect the dead. This belief reframes life after death as a divine act, not an innate property of the soul. This idea isn't new. Theologians like John Milton argued that the Bible emphasizes resurrection over innate immortality. In 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓇𝓎, Milton wrote, "Man is a living soul, not an immortal one." Christian mortalists cite verses like Ecclesiastes 9:5, "The dead know nothing," and Romans 6:23, "The wages of sin is death," to support their claim that death is an unconscious state, awaiting Judgment Day. Unlike traditional views, Christian mortalism rejects immediate entry into heaven or hell. Instead, the dead rest until God determines their fate, resurrection to eternal life or annihilation. This challenges ideas of eternal torment, presenting annihilation as the ultimate punishment for the unrighteous. Critics argue this diminishes the soul's significance, but proponents see it as a return to biblical teachings, free from philosophical influences like Plato's. For them, this perspective highlights God's grace and power, making resurrection central to salvation. Hell is eternal punishment, an all-loving God, and an eternal hell. How can these ideas coexist? The concept of hell as unending punishment has perplexed theologians for centuries. Is it justice or a relic of fear? Scriptures like Matthew 25:46. These will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life, shaped the belief in eternal torment. For St. Augustine, infinite punishment reflected the infinite nature of God's justice. Sinning against an eternal being warranted eternal consequences. Thomas Aquinas viewed hell differently, arguing that its suffering comes from separation from God, a self-inflicted state, not imposed cruelty. But critics question the fairness of eternal punishment for finite sins. Philosopher John Hick argued that a truly benevolent God would redeem all souls, making eternal hell incompatible with divine love. Universalists agree, seeing ultimate salvation for all as a reflection of God's mercy. Conditionalists, meanwhile, propose annihilation, total destruction of the soul, over eternal suffering. Modern thinkers like C.S. Lewis reframe hell as a choice. In The Great Divorce, Lewis wrote, "The doors of hell are locked on the inside," suggesting that hell is self-imposed, driven by pride and despair, not divine wrath. Eternal bondage in Maya. We spend our lives chasing desires, convinced that fulfillment lies just beyond the next achievement. But what if this endless striving is an illusion? In Advaita Vedanta, this illusion is called Maya, the cosmic deception that binds us to an eternal cycle of suffering. Maya, often translated as illusion, veils the truth of reality. According to Adi Shankaracharya, it creates the false belief that the material world is all there is, dividing self from other and obscuring our true nature. Under Maya's spell, we identify with our egos, possessions, and fleeting desires, forgetting our infinite self. This illusion traps us in samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. We chase satisfaction in wealth, status, or pleasure, only to find them temporary. As the Upanishads teach, that which is real does not change. That which changes is not real. Maya offers no lasting fulfillment because it is fundamentally unreal. Shankaracharya explains that Maya is a projection of Brahman, the ultimate reality. Like a dream, it governs us until we awaken. Breaking free requires jnana, true knowledge gained through introspection and spiritual discipline. The Bhagavad Gita echoes this when Krishna says, "The wise see no distinction between the self and the universe." Think of Maya as a mirage. It appears real from a distance, but closer inspection reveals the illusion. Similarly, recognizing the self, Atman, as one with Brahman dissolves Maya's grip. This awakening reveals reality as infinite, eternal, and whole. Radical freedom and responsibility. You are free, completely free. But that freedom comes with a weight, the responsibility for everything you do, choose, and fail to choose. This is radical freedom, a concept explored by Jean-Paul Sartre, and it's both liberating and terrifying. Sartre believed humans are condemned to be free. Without a divine plan or predetermined essence, We create our purpose through choices. Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself, Sartre wrote. This means no fate or external guide dictates your path, only you. Radical freedom strips away excuses. Blaming fate or circumstances, Sartre argued, is bad faith, a denial of freedom. Even in oppression, your response is your choice. You are not a passive victim, but an active creator of meaning. Yet, this freedom brings anguish. The dizzying realization that every choice reflects your values and shapes humanity. When you act, you declare, "This is how life should be." Like standing at a cliff's edge, the fear lies in your power to choose. Existence precedes essence, Sartre declared. You exist first, and only later define what that means. It's daunting but empowering. If you're stuck in a job or relationship, Sartre would say you're choosing to stay. Silence in the face of injustice, too, is a choice, a decision to accept the status quo. Thanatos versus Eros. At the core of human existence lies a battle between two forces, Eros, the life drive, and Thanatos, the death drive. Freud introduced these concepts in Beyond the Pleasure Principle, proposing that human behavior is shaped not just by the pursuit of pleasure, but by a darker, self-destructive impulse as well. Eros represents life, love, creation, and preservation, the force behind relationships, creativity, and the continuation of life. Thanatos, in contrast, embodies destruction, aggression, and the drive toward non-existence. Freud believed this tension between creation and destruction defines humanity, pulling us between the complexity of life and the simplicity of lifeless matter. These forces aren't just abstract ideas, they manifest in our everyday lives. Eros drives us to build, to love, to create meaning, while Thanatos tempts us towards sabotage and chaos. Think of an artist consumed by self-doubt while creating a masterpiece, or civilizations that thrive, yet wage wars that threaten their existence. Eros and Thanatos are present in personal struggles and global conflicts alike. Critics question the existence of a true death drive, suggesting it might be a misreading of frustration or anxiety. Yet, the metaphor resonates because it reflects our inner contradictions. Why do we destroy what we love or sabotage our happiness? Freud's contemporary, Carl Jung, saw this struggle as essential to growth, a balance between opposing forces that drives transformation. Life is not about overcoming the tension between Eros and Thanatos, but living within it. In every creation lies the shadow of destruction, and in every ending, the seed of renewal. The bad infinite. Infinity isn't always majestic. It can be terrifying. This is the essence of the bad infinite, a concept introduced by German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. While infinity often evokes boundless potential, Hegel warned of a darker version, an endless loop of hollow repetition that traps rather than expands. Hegel distinguished between two kinds of infinity. The true infinite is dynamic and transformative. It grows, transcends limits, and evolves, like the expansion of knowledge or the universe itself. In contrast, the bad infinite is static and lifeless, an endless cycle offering no new insight or progress. Think of a number line stretching infinitely in both directions. Though boundless, it's sterile, a repetition of the same, forever. Imagine climbing an endless staircase with no new floors, no horizons, just step after step, repeating endlessly. That's the bad infinite, where infinity becomes stagnation. For Hegel, this wasn't just theoretical. It was a philosophical warning. He saw this flawed infinity in rigid systems, unattainable ideals, or obsessive pursuits where progress becomes a loop of frustration. Take the pursuit of perfection. If perfection is infinite, striving for it can trap us in endless dissatisfaction. Each success only pushes perfection further out of reach, creating a cycle with no resolution, a bad infinite. Hegel argued that infinity isn't inherently good or bad. The key lies in how we engage with it. The true infinite embraces limits as opportunities to transcend, finding meaning in motion and growth. The bad infinite, however, delivers monotony, trapping us in cycles that lead nowhere. Hegel's insight reminds us that not all infinities inspire. Some entangle. True infinity isn't endless repetition. It's purposeful transformation. Mirror stage. The person you see in the mirror is not you. This reflection, familiar yet distant, is central to Jacques Lacan's concept of the mirror stage, a key idea in psychoanalysis. Lacan proposed that our sense of self begins with a misrecognition, an illusion that shapes who we believe we are. Around 6 to 18 months of age, an infant recognizes their reflection in a mirror. Though they experience their body as fragmented and chaotic, the mirror presents a unified, idealized image. The child identifies with this image, seeing it as me. But this unity is an illusion. Lacan argued that the image in the mirror is a projection, not aligned with the child's fragmented reality. This moment marks the birth of the I, when the child sees themselves as an object, separate from the world. Yet this selfhood is fundamentally alienating. The I is based on an external image, not inner reality. From this point, identity is shaped by a tension between how we see ourselves and how we believe others see us. Lacan's theory reveals that our sense of self is rooted in misrecognition. The person we think we are is not authentic, but a construct, a mask formed by cultural expectations, others' gazes, and our fantasies. Even in adulthood, much of our identity is shaped by external forces, from roles we play to goals we pursue. Idle talk. Most of what we say is meaningless. This is the essence of Martin Heidegger's concept of idle talk, which he used to describe shallow, repetitive communication that dominates daily life. Idle talk isn't harmless small talk. It disconnects us from authentic living and obscures deeper truths. Idle talk occurs when language becomes a cycle of unexamined repetition. Gossip, clichés, and empty affirmations are prime examples. In Being and Time, Heidegger described it as talking about something without genuine understanding. It gives the illusion of connection, but alienates us from deeper engagement with the world. Consider a viral headline shared and debated endlessly. How many truly understand the issue versus echoing opinions they've absorbed? Idle talk thrives on surface-level chatter, unconcerned with truth, keeping conversations alive without substance. For Heidegger, this isn't a trivial annoyance. It leads to fallenness, where we lose ourselves in societal noise and abandon deeper, existential questions. Instead of thinking critically, we adopt pre-packaged ideas, allowing them to shape our worldview. What makes idle talk dangerous is its comfort. It offers belonging and participation in collective narratives, but pulls us away from authenticity. We stop engaging with our unique perspectives, conforming to shallow patterns of discourse. Heidegger didn't condemn all communication, but believed language could either reveal or obscure truth. Idle talk replaces reflection with noise, blinding us to life's deeper meaning. Banality of evil. Evil doesn't always arrive with horns and fire. Sometimes it shows up quietly, in a grey suit, doing a job. This is the essence of the banality of evil, a term coined by Hannah Arendt in Eichmann in Jerusalem. It challenges our assumptions about what evil looks like and how it operates. In 1961, Adolf Eichmann, a key architect of the Holocaust, stood trial. To many, he was a monster. But Arendt saw something unexpected. Eichmann wasn't fanatical or even particularly intelligent. He was ordinary, a man who followed orders, shuffled papers, and avoided reflecting on the morality of his actions. Arendt called this the banality of evil. Eichmann's crimes weren't driven by deep hatred, but by thoughtlessness, an uncritical compliance with authority, and a refusal to question the system he served. He performed atrocities with bureaucratic detachment, not malice. This idea is terrifying because it suggests that evil doesn't always require hatred. It thrives in systems that discourage independent thinking. When people reduce themselves to just doing their job, unimaginable harm becomes possible. Arendt argued that Eichmann's failure to think, to judge, to take responsibility was his greatest crime. As she wrote, "Most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil." Profound boredom. Boredom isn't just an annoyance, it's a revelation. This is the unsettling truth behind profound boredom, a concept explored by German philosopher Martin Heidegger. Unlike ordinary boredom, profound boredom isn't about a lack of entertainment, it's about the absence of meaning. Heidegger described profound boredom as a state where everything feels indifferent, the distractions of daily life, work, hobbies, relationships, lose their grip. Time stretches out and life feels empty. But for Heidegger, this isn't merely depressing, it's transformative. In his 1929 lectures, he explained that profound boredom strips away the layers of routine, forcing us to confront existence itself. He wrote, "Boredom brings about a peculiar state in which one is held in limbo, cast back upon oneself." Profound boredom reveals the fragility of the structures we rely on to give life meaning. It's like staring into a void, unsettling, but also an opportunity. When life's usual answers fail, we're left with the fundamental questions. Why am I here? What is my purpose? These questions, often buried beneath daily distractions, become impossible to ignore. Heidegger saw this confrontation with nothingness as both terrifying and necessary. It's a chance to redefine meaning, not as something given, but as something we create. In moments of profound boredom, when even passions feel hollow, we glimpse the limits of our constructed identities. This is the paradox. Profound boredom doesn't offer answers. It creates the space for us to find them. Antinomy of pure reason. The universe both has a beginning and doesn't. This paradox is central to Immanuel Kant's antinomies of pure reason, introduced in his Critique of Pure Reason. Kant argued that when reason attempts to address ultimate questions, it produces contradictions, antinomies, where opposing statements both seem valid. These contradictions reveal the limits of human understanding and expose the boundaries of what we can truly know. Kant's first antinomy explores whether the universe has a beginning in time. On one side, reason suggests the universe must have a beginning. If time stretches infinitely backward, the present could never arrive. Yet reason also claims the universe cannot have a beginning, because if it did, it would require a cause, and that cause would need another, creating an infinite regress. Both arguments appear logical, but are irreconcilable. Kant explained that these contradictions occur because human reason applies principles beyond the realm of experience. Concepts like space, time, and causality aren't intrinsic features of the universe. They're the frameworks through which our minds interpret it. Just as a fish, shaped by its experience of water, cannot imagine life outside it, our minds, shaped by space and time, cannot comprehend realities beyond these limits. The antinomies don't solve these questions, but reveal reason's boundaries. Kant argued that we can ask whether the universe is finite or eternal, but the answers lie beyond our cognitive reach. Epistemic injustice. What happens when someone is denied knowledge, not for what they say, but for who they are? This is the essence of epistemic injustice, a concept introduced by 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓎. It describes how certain voices are dismissed or undervalued due to bias, prejudice, or systemic power imbalances. It's not just unfair, it violates their role as contributors to collective understanding. 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓎 identifies two key forms. Testimonial injustice occurs when someone's credibility is undermined due to stereotypes. For example, a woman in a male-dominated workplace may share an idea that's ignored until a man repeats it. It's not her knowledge being doubted, it's her identity. The second form, hermeneutical injustice, arises when society lacks the concepts to articulate certain experiences. For example, before terms like sexual harassment were widely recognized, women couldn't effectively name or challenge their experiences. It wasn't a lack of intelligence, it was a lack of societal frameworks. These injustices are systemic, silencing marginalized voices and reinforcing power imbalances. Over time, they exclude groups from shaping knowledge and truth, perpetuating inequality. 𝐹𝒾𝓆 writes, "The epistemic injustice done to someone as a knower is both distinctive and destructive. It doesn't just harm individuals, it impoverishes society by narrowing the perspectives we hear." To combat this, 𝐹𝒾𝓆 advocates for epistemic virtue, listening without prejudice, recognizing bias, and valuing diverse voices. It's not easy but essential for a just society.
Mimetic desire.
You don't desire what you think you desire. This is the foundation of mimetic desire, a concept by philosopher René Girard, which argues that our desires are imitative. We want things not because they're inherently valuable, but because others desire them first. Our aspirations are shaped by mimicking others' desires, often unconsciously. Girard described this dynamic as a triangular structure. The subject, you, the object, what you desire, and the model, the person whose desire you're imitating. For example, a new gadget or a dream job often becomes desirable because someone else wants or has it. Advertisements and social media amplify this, showcasing lifestyles designed to spark envy and imitation. Girard wrote, "Human beings are never directly in competition for things. They are in competition because they imitate each other's desires." This leads to rivalry and tension. We don't just chase objects, we chase the validation or status they represent. And when multiple people pursue the same goal, not for the object itself but due to imitation, conflict arises. The result? A mimetic trap, where the harder we pursue others' desires, the less satisfied we feel upon achieving them. Girard also linked mimetic desire to scapegoating. When rivalry spirals, societies often project blame onto a scapegoat, diffusing tension through exclusion or sacrifice, a process central to many cultural and religious traditions. The paradox of tragedy. Why do we take pleasure in suffering? This is the paradox of tragedy. Why are we drawn to stories of pain, loss, and despair? In life, we avoid suffering, yet in art, we seek it out. Why? Aristotle, in Poetics, argued that tragedy serves a cathartic purpose. Experiencing emotions like pity and fear in a safe, controlled way allows us to process our vulnerabilities and leave feeling relieved, even purified. The suffering on stage becomes a way to confront our own fears. David Hume, however, found this puzzling. In Of Tragedy, he suggested that it's not suffering itself we enjoy, but the artistic skill that transforms it. A well-crafted tragedy blends sorrow with beauty, elevating pain into something meaningful. Friedrich Nietzsche, in The Birth of Tragedy, took a darker view. He argued that tragedy forces us to face life's harsh realities, chaos, suffering, and death, yet affirms life in the process. Art makes the unbearable bearable, turning agony into something that deepens our understanding of existence. Psychologically, tragedy also connects us. Watching others suffer evokes empathy, reminding us of our shared humanity. Crying over fictional characters' pain reflects our own, creating a sense of solidarity in vulnerability. So why do we need tragedy? Perhaps it's a combination: catharsis, aesthetic beauty, existential confrontation, and emotional connection. Tragedy transforms pain into something profound, holding a mirror to our fears and desires. 𝐹𝒾𝓆. Why do you act against your better judgment? This is the puzzle of 𝐹𝒾𝓆, acting against what you know is right. You're fully aware of the consequences, yet you choose the opposite. Socrates dismissed the idea of 𝐹𝒾𝓆, arguing that wrongdoing stems from ignorance. If you truly knew what was good, you'd pursue it. But Plato saw it differently. In the Republic, he divided the soul into reason, spirit, and appetite. 𝐹𝒾𝓆, he argued, arises when desire, appetite, overpowers logic, reason. Aristotle expanded this in 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓎 ethics, distinguishing between the weak-willed, who regret succumbing to desire, and the self-indulgent, who feel no conflict. 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓎, for Aristotle, exists in this tension, knowing what's right but failing to act on it. Fast forward to modern times, and 𝐹𝒾𝒾𝓎 is everywhere. Staying up late despite needing sleep, breaking a diet for a moment of indulgence. It's the gap between intention and action, frustratingly universal. Psychologists argue it's a battle between short-term gratification and long-term goals, or between emotion and logic, where impulses override reason. What makes 𝐹𝒾𝒾𝓎 so compelling is its universality. It's not about ignorance or intelligence. It's about the fragility of human will. Knowing what's right doesn't mean acting on it, highlighting the complexity of our minds. Meta-ontology. What does it mean to say something exists? This is the core question of meta-ontology, a branch of philosophy that goes beyond asking what exists to examine how we decide what exists. While ontology studies categories of being, meta-ontology critiques the frameworks and assumptions we use to define those categories. Philosopher Willard Van Orman Quine reshaped this discussion in On What There Is, arguing that before asking, does X exist, we must clarify the language and criteria we're using. For Quine, the critical question is, what does it mean to say X exists? He used Pegasus, the mythical winged horse, as an example. Pegasus doesn't exist in reality, but discussing Pegasus implies it exists conceptually. So, what separates real entities, like horses, from conceptual ones, like Pegasus? Quine proposed a pragmatic approach. Something exists if it is indispensable to our best scientific theories. Electrons, for example, are considered real because they explain observable phenomena. However, this doesn't settle the deeper question of why we privilege certain frameworks over others. Philosopher Eli Hirsch added nuance with his idea of quantifier variance. The notion that multiple frameworks for understanding existence can be equally valid. One might include abstract entities like numbers, while another excludes them, without either being more true. Meta-ontology reveals that the question of existence has no universal answer. It's shaped by language, culture, and intellectual context. Every claim of existence reflects, psychologists argue, the ethics of forgetting. Forgetting isn't just a lapse, it's an act that shapes who we are. This is the heart of the ethics of forgetting, which explores the tension between memory and morality. While society often glorifies remembrance, philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Paul Ricoeur argue that forgetting is essential for growth. In On the Genealogy of Morality, Nietzsche described forgetting as an active capacity. He believed that without it, we'd be paralyzed by past grievances, trapped in cycles of resentment, and unable to move forward. Forgetting, for Nietzsche, is a moral tool, a way to break free from vengeance and suffering, allowing individuals and societies to heal and grow. However, forgetting is a double-edged sword. In Memory, History, Forgetting, Ricoeur warned of its dangers. While forgetting can help heal wounds, it also risks erasing vital truths. Ricoeur described abusive forgetting as a form of violence, silencing voices and distorting history. This tension is clear in debates about historical memory. Post-conflict societies, for instance, must decide whether to preserve past atrocities in detail, risking reopened wounds, or to soften those memories, allowing reconciliation. Truth and Reconciliation Commissions wrestle with this balance between accountability and coexistence. Even personally, the ethics of forgetting poses challenges. Is it right to cling to every betrayal, or can forgiveness, often tied to forgetting, help rebuild relationships and move past pain? The Ouroboros, a serpent devouring its own tail, an endless cycle of creation and destruction. This is the Ouroboros, one of humanity's oldest symbols, appearing in Egyptian texts, Greek philosophy, and alchemical manuscripts. It represents a paradox, a self-sustaining cycle where beginnings and endings blur into one. Beyond its image, the Ouroboros challenges how we understand time, existence, and the universe. At its core, the Ouroboros embodies self-reference, a system that contains itself. The ancient Greeks connected it to eternal return, the idea that all things loop back, endlessly repeating. Stoic philosophers saw the cosmos as cyclic, destroyed and reborn in a fiery process called 𝐹𝒶𝒾𝓇𝓎. The Ouroboros thus reflects existence itself, creation, destruction, and renewal. Philosophically, it ties to self-referential paradoxes like, "This sentence is false." Both true and false, it creates an infinite loop. Hegel drew on this in his Phenomenology of Spirit, describing contradictions that resolve into new forms, perpetually renewing meaning. In science, the Ouroboros symbolizes the interplay between the universe's largest and smallest scales. The cosmic Ouroboros links galaxies and quantum particles, suggesting a self-sustaining system where beginnings and ends dissolve into one another. But the Ouroboros is also unsettling, hinting at a universe trapped in repetition. Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence posed a stark question. If your life repeated endlessly, would you embrace it or despair? The Flynn effect. Are we getting smarter or just better at taking tests? This question drives the Flynn effect, a phenomenon named after James Flynn, who discovered rising IQ scores over the past century. Flynn found that average scores have increased by about 3 points per decade, meaning someone with an average IQ in the 1930s would score well below today's average. But the rise isn't universal. It's most noticeable in areas like abstract reasoning and problem solving, not general knowledge or arithmetic. Flynn argued this trend isn't genetic. It's too rapid for evolution. Instead, it reflects environmental changes. The 20th century saw shifts toward abstract thinking in education, jobs requiring problem solving, and even the way we engage with technology, like video games and smartphones. These factors trained our brains for the kinds of thinking IQ tests measure. But does this mean we're genuinely smarter? Critics say rising scores may reflect familiarity with test formats, not true cognitive growth. Psychologist Ulrich Neisser noted that IQ tests focus on specific skills like logic and pattern recognition, neglecting other forms of intelligence like creativity or emotional understanding. There's also concern that this trend could reverse. Recent studies show the Flynn effect stalling or declining in some regions, potentially due to rising inequality, underfunded education, and lifestyle changes. Omnipotence paradox. Can an all-powerful being create a rock so heavy that even they cannot lift it? This playful question introduces the omnipotence paradox, a dilemma that challenges the very idea of unlimited power. Omnipotence is typically defined as the ability to do anything, but the paradox reveals a contradiction. If an omnipotent being can create such a rock, they cannot lift it and are therefore not all-powerful. If they cannot create it, their power is still limited. Either way, omnipotence seems to falter. Medieval philosophers like Thomas Aquinas tackled this issue, arguing that omnipotence does not include the ability to do the logically impossible. In Summa Theologica, Aquinas claimed that contradictions, like a square circle or an unliftable rock, are nonsensical and don't count as limitations of power. For him, omnipotence means the ability to do all things that are possible within the bounds of reason. René Descartes took a more radical stance, suggesting that an omnipotent being could transcend even logic. If God willed 2 + 2 to equal 5, Descartes argued, it would simply be so. But this interpretation unsettles many, as it makes omnipotence incomprehensible, bending the very framework of reason. The omnipotence paradox extends beyond theology, questioning whether the concept of unlimited power is coherent. Can an omnipotent being create a world they cannot control, or end their own existence? These questions reveal the limits of language and human understanding. Genealogy of morals. Why do we call some things good and others evil? Are these universal truths or constructs shaped by history? Friedrich Nietzsche's genealogy of morals challenges our assumptions, tracing the origins of morality to power struggles and cultural shifts. Nietzsche argues that morality isn't timeless or divine, but a product of history. He identifies two types of morality: master morality and slave morality. Master morality, rooted in ancient aristocratic societies, valued strength, power, and vitality. For the ruling class, good meant qualities they embodied, while bad referred to weakness and mediocrity. Slave morality, by contrast, emerged from the resentment of the oppressed. Lacking power, they redefined morality, labeling strength as evil and elevating traits like humility and suffering as good. Nietzsche calls this a revaluation of values, a reversal of the aristocratic moral code. Christianity, he argues, codified this morality, glorifying suffering and promising rewards for the meek. For Nietzsche, this moral framework became a tool for the weak to undermine the strong. While revolutionary in its time, Nietzsche warns that slave morality now stifles human potential, promoting conformity over individuality. He introduces the Übermensch, Overman, a figure who transcends traditional morality to create new, life-affirming values. Nietzsche doesn't dismiss compassion, but urges us to question inherited values. Where do our judgments of good and evil come from? Do they empower us or confine us? The sublime. Standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into a storm-tossed ocean, you feel something profound, a mixture of awe and fear, overwhelming and almost indescribable. This is the sublime, a concept that has fascinated philosophers and artists for centuries, exploring the intersection of beauty, terror, and human comprehension. The sublime isn't simple admiration or pleasure. It's about scale. Edmund Burke, in A Philosophical Inquiry, described it as astonishment, with some degree of horror. For Burke, the sublime arises in the presence of vast, uncontrollable forces, nature's power, infinite space, or the inevitability of death. Immanuel Kant expanded on this in Critique of Judgment. He argued that the sublime isn't just external, it's a mental experience. When faced with the immensity of a starry sky or towering mountains, we feel small, yet realize our capacity to comprehend such vastness. This tension between insignificance and intellectual power defines the sublime. The sublime emerges where beauty meets danger. A serene lake may be beautiful. Will you awaken from with its deafening noise and sheer drop, becomes sublime. It's the thrill of standing close to something that could destroy you, yet marveling at its existence. Art and literature capture this sensation. Romantic poets like Wordsworth and painters like Caspar David Friedrich sought to evoke the sublime's essence, reminding us of forces greater than ourselves. Today, we feel it in images of distant galaxies or the raw power of storms. The sublime challenges us to embrace the unknown, finding meaning in the tension between fear and wonder, glimpsing both our smallness and our extraordinary capacity to perceive it. The paradox of hedonism. The harder you chase happiness, the further it slips away. This is the paradox of hedonism, a concept that reveals the flaw in pursuing happiness directly. The more we focus on achieving pleasure as an end goal, the less likely we are to attain it. Happiness, it seems, cannot be forced. It emerges as a byproduct of other pursuits. Philosopher Henry Sidgwick popularized this idea in Methods of Ethics, arguing that an excessive focus on pleasure often backfires. He wrote, "The impulse towards pleasure, if too predominant, defeats its own aim. Fixating on happiness amplifies minor discomforts, making it harder to feel content. Happiness thrives when we're absorbed in activities beyond ourselves." Modern psychology confirms this paradox. Research shows that people who prioritize meaningful goals, helping others, mastering skills, or nurturing relationships, report greater happiness than those chasing pleasure for its own sake. Philosopher John Stuart Mill echoed this, observing, Those only are happy who have their minds fixed on some object other than their own happiness. Why does this paradox exist? Happiness seems tied to purpose and engagement. A life centered solely on self-gratification feels hollow, while striving for something greater often leads to unexpected joy. The emptiness doctrine. Nothing exists independently. This is the essence of the emptiness doctrine, a cornerstone of Buddhist philosophy that redefines how we understand existence. Far from nihilism, it's a profound shift in perspective. Nothing has inherent existence. Everything arises through interdependence. Indian philosopher Nagarjuna in the 2nd century developed the concept of shunyata, or emptiness. He argued that everything, objects, ideas, even the self, depends on causes, conditions, and relationships. Nothing exists in isolation. Take a tree, for example. It seems solid and independent, but it relies on sunlight, water, soil, and air. Remove these conditions, and the tree ceases to exist. As Nagarjuna wrote, "There does not exist anything that is not dependent. Therefore, there does not exist anything that is not empty." Emptiness doesn't mean nothingness. It means things lack fixed, independent essence. This extends to the self. Who you are depends on relationships, culture, and countless conditions. Without these, what remains? Understanding emptiness matters because, according to Nagarjuna, clinging to the idea of fixed identities causes suffering. We grasp at permanence in a world of constant change, leading to attachment, fear, and frustration. Seeing the emptiness of all things frees us from this clinging, allowing us to live in harmony with reality's impermanence. The emptiness doctrine reveals that reality isn't made of isolated entities, but infinite connections. It's unsettling to think that nothing has an independent essence, not even you, but it's also liberating. Once you see the interdependence of all things, everything changes. The problem of hope. Hope is a double-edged sword. It drives resilience and pushes us forward through adversity, but it also ties us to an uncertain future, leaving us vulnerable to disappointment. The problem of hope questions whether hope is a gift or a burden. Friedrich Nietzsche was deeply critical of hope, calling it the most evil of evils, inhuman, all too human. He referenced Pandora's box, where hope was trapped alongside humanity's torments. For Nietzsche, hope wasn't salvation, but a cruel prolongation of suffering, chaining us to unattainable expectations. In contrast, philosophers like Gabriel Marcel saw hope as an act of faith in the face of uncertainty. In Homo Viator, Marcel described hope as resistance, a refusal to give in to despair. It wasn't about guaranteeing an outcome, but about affirming meaning, even in hopeless circumstances. The dual nature of hope lies in its application. Blind hope, detached from reality, leads to endless longing and inevitable disillusionment when dreams fail to materialize. However, Ernst Bloch saw hope as essential for progress. In The Principle of Hope, Bloch argued that true hope inspires action rather than passive waiting. It's not wishful thinking, but a force for transformation and building a better future. Anthropic bias. Why does the universe feel so perfectly suited for life? Is it a cosmic coincidence? Or are we only asking because we're here to ask? This is the heart of anthropic bias, a concept that challenges how we view existence. Anthropic bias stems from the anthropic principle, explored by thinkers like Brandon Carter and Nick Bostrom. It states that our observations about the universe are influenced by the fact that we exist to make them. A universe capable of supporting life is the only kind we could observe, because otherwise we wouldn't be here to notice it. Consider this analogy. If you're in a room with air, you might think, how convenient there's air for me to breathe. But the only reason you're alive to ask is because the air is already there. Applied to the universe, the fact that it appears fine-tuned for life isn't surprising. It's a prerequisite for our existence. The physical constants of the universe, like the speed of light or strength of gravity, are so precisely calibrated that even slight changes would make life impossible. To some, this suggests a creator or a multiverse of countless, uninhabitable universes. But anthropic bias cautions us. We can only observe a universe compatible with life, just as fish can't imagine a dry world. Nick Bostrom argues that anthropic reasoning explains the universe's apparent fine-tuning while exposing the limits of our perspective. It challenges us to recognize how our existence skews our understanding of reality. The veil of Maya. Everything you perceive, the people, the sky, even your body, might be an illusion. This idea lies at the heart of the veil of Maya, a concept from Indian philosophy, particularly Advaita Vedanta. It suggests that the material world is a facade, obscuring the ultimate truth, Brahman, the infinite essence of existence. Maya, meaning illusion or magic in Sanskrit, creates the appearance of separation in a fundamentally unified universe. Adi Shankaracharya, a key figure in Vedanta, explained, Brahman alone is real. The world is illusory. The self is not other than Brahman. Maya binds us to the cycle of birth and death by making us believe we are finite individuals. Imagine a dream. While dreaming, everything feels real: joy, pain, fear. But upon waking, you realize it was all in your mind. Similarly, the veil of Maya convinces us that our identities, struggles, and desires are real, though they are fleeting and transient. Western philosophy mirrors this idea. Arthur Schopenhauer, influenced by Vedanta, described life as a perpetually disillusioning experience. He likened Maya to a world driven by blind desires, obscuring deeper truths. For him, art and asceticism offered glimpses beyond the illusion. How do we lift the veil? Vedanta suggests paths like knowledge, jnana yoga, and self-realization, recognizing that your true essence isn't your body or mind, but the infinite consciousness behind them. This isn't about rejecting life, but seeing through it, experiencing it without attachment. When the veil lifts, only unity remains, an indescribable truth where the seer, the seen, and the act of seeing are one. The question is, will you awaken from the illusion or remain entangled in the dream? The Grand Inquisitor. What if humanity doesn't truly want freedom, but instead craves comfort, security, and the illusion of choice? This unsettling question lies at the heart of The Grand Inquisitor, a parable from Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. It challenges our beliefs about power, faith, and human nature. In 16th century Spain, Christ returns during the Inquisition. The people recognize him and rejoice at his compassion, but the church, fearing he will disrupt their authority, arrests him. That night, the Grand Inquisitor visits Christ in his cell, not to worship, but to condemn. The Inquisitor accuses Christ of giving humanity a burden it cannot bear: freedom. You wanted to make them free, he says, but they are weak and fearful. He claims that people do not want the responsibility of choice, which brings only fear and suffering. Instead, they desire leaders who provide certainty, even at the cost of their liberty. The Church, the Inquisitor argues, has done what Christ would not: taken away freedom in exchange for happiness. We will feed them, he declares, but we will also enslave them. Christ listens in silence, offering no defense. At the end, he simply kisses the Inquisitor and departs. The meaning of this gesture, whether forgiveness, rebuke, or understanding, is left ambiguous. The parable confronts the tension between freedom and security. Are we truly capable of embracing free will, or do we instinctively trade it for comfort? Dostoevsky provides no answers, only the haunting question: when faced with freedom or ease, which do we choose, and what does that choice reveal about us? The illusion of free will. You believe you're in control of your choices: what to eat, what to say, which path to take. But what if that control is an illusion? What if free will, the cornerstone of human agency, is simply a story your brain tells after the fact? Philosopher Baruch Spinoza likened humans to stones rolling downhill, convinced they control their movement because they're unaware of the forces driving them. Men think themselves free, he wrote, because they are conscious of their actions, but ignorant of the causes. Centuries later, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet's experiments revealed that the brain begins preparing for actions milliseconds before we consciously decide to act. Your choice to pick up a glass of water may feel deliberate, but your brain already made the call. Modern thinkers like Sam Harris argue that every decision arises from prior causes, genetics, environment, and unconscious processes beyond our control. You can do what you decide to do, Harris says, but you cannot decide what you will decide to do. Even the act of deliberation is shaped by factors outside our awareness. Critics worry that rejecting free will undermines accountability, but Harris contends it shifts the focus from blame to understanding. Why did someone act this way? How can harm be prevented? The is-ought problem. What if everything you believe about morality rests on a leap, a jump from facts to values that logic can't justify? This is the is-ought problem, a challenge to moral reasoning introduced by David Hume in the 18th century. In a treatise of human nature, Hume observed that moral arguments often describe how the world is, facts, natural laws, and then leap to how the world ought to be, what we should do or value. This leap, he argued, is unjustified. There's no logical connection between descriptive statements and prescriptive moral rules. For example, consider the argument, humans evolved to compete for resources, so we ought to prioritize self-interest. The first part is factual, the second part is a moral claim. But why should the fact that we evolved this way dictate how we ought to act? Hume warned that this shift sneaks in unexamined assumptions. This forces us to ask, where do moral values come from if not directly from facts? Some argue morality is objective, akin to mathematical truths, while others see it as a human invention shaped by culture and emotion. The is-ought problem also sparks debate about science and morality. Thinkers like Sam Harris suggest science can guide morality by revealing what promotes human well-being. Critics counter that even this assumes a value, that well-being is worth pursuing, a value science cannot prove. For Hume, moral judgments ultimately stem from emotions, not logic. As he wrote, reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions. Repressive desublimation. What if the freedom you think you're enjoying is actually a trap? Herbert Marcuse's concept of repressive desublimation, introduced in One-Dimensional Man, challenges us to reconsider the desires and choices we think are liberating. Marcuse builds on Freud's idea that primal desires, like sexuality and creativity, are repressed by society and transformed into sublimation, fueling achievements like art and culture. But Marcuse argues that in advanced industrial societies, repression doesn't vanish. It becomes more deceptive. Modern consumer culture manipulates our desires, giving us the illusion of freedom while maintaining control. This is repressive desublimation. Desires are released not for liberation, but to keep us compliant. Think about consumerism. Desires for individuality are channeled into buying products that define us. Critiques of society are absorbed into entertainment, making resistance a commodity. Even rebellion, like rock and roll, becomes commercialized, diffusing its power to challenge the system. By satisfying immediate desires, the system prevents us from questioning their origins. Are our pleasures truly ours, or are they pre-designed to maintain the status quo? Critics argue that Marcuse underestimates human agency, but he wasn't dismissing our power. Instead, he urged us to stay vigilant. True freedom, he believed, doesn't come from indulging in pre-packaged choices, but from questioning the system that creates them. Philosophical pessimism. Life is suffering and not worth living. This is the core idea of philosophical pessimism, the unsettling belief that existence itself is fundamentally flawed. Thinkers like Arthur Schopenhauer argue that life is less a gift and more a ceaseless struggle, where fleeting joys are overshadowed by pain, boredom, and futility. Schopenhauer, often called the father of pessimism, believed life is driven by the will to live, a blind and insatiable force compelling all beings to survive and reproduce. This will, he argued, is the root of suffering. In the world as will and representation, he wrote, life swings like a pendulum backward and forward between pain and boredom. Even when desires are fulfilled, satisfaction fades, leaving us chasing new goals or trapped in emptiness. For Schopenhauer, suffering outweighs happiness by design. Pain is vivid and inescapable, while joy is fleeting and dull, and in the end, death looms as the inevitable conclusion to this cycle of torment. Negative panpsychism. Negative panpsychism is a radical twist on an ancient idea. Traditional panpsychism suggests that consciousness is fundamental to reality, present even in the smallest particles. But negative panpsychism, introduced by philosopher Riccardo Manzotti, takes a darker turn. Consciousness might be everywhere, but it may not feel like anything at all. This challenges one of our deepest assumptions, that consciousness is inherently subjective, tied to experience. Negative panpsychism argues that while reality is structured in a way that allows for consciousness, most of it exists without inner awareness. Atoms, rocks, and trees may have the underlying properties necessary for consciousness, but they lack the complexity to generate subjective experience. In this view, consciousness isn't a universal sentience. It's a potential, rarely realized. Imagine a world where every brick in a wall holds the ingredients for thought, but never thinks. The brain, then, wouldn't create consciousness from nothing. It would merely arrange existing structures in a way that activates subjective awareness. This aligns with theories suggesting that consciousness emerges only under specific conditions, requiring the right level of complexity and integration. Negative panpsychism raises unsettling questions. If consciousness is so rare, how did it arise at all? Is self-awareness an accident, a fleeting anomaly in an otherwise indifferent universe?